I was hailed as a genius at the age of 8. At 20, I entered an assassination organization. At 29, my swordsmanship broke past its limit. At 40, I slaughtered the demon race and preserved all of humanity. But when I returned in triumph, my reward was to be personally sent to the guillotine by my own father. I thought my life had ended just like that, but heaven played a joke on me and let me be reborn as a baby. At the same time, a figure walked over from afar. To ensure the family's prosperity, the injection of fresh blood was also a crucial step. But among this year's batch, there isn't a single outstanding one. No matter how you look at it, these can only be called trash. That figure stopped in front of my crib, glared at me from the corner of his eye, and his cold gaze revealed overwhelming killing intent. Seeing that I did not react, he cursed with satisfaction. "There's one piece of trash here that isn't as noisy." He ordered his subordinates to take these infants to the cradle of blades. The moment I saw that familiar face, it was clearly the young Victor. Instantly, killing intent surged in my eyes. This man was the mastermind behind my death. Perhaps heaven sensed the injustice done to me and gave me a second chance. Then I will make sure the Istaville family no longer exists in this world. Although I wanted to take revenge immediately, there was nothing this infant body could do. But the Cradle of Blades is a great opportunity to improve my strength. What I need to do now is quickly increase my power and make myself even stronger. The Cradle of Blades is one of the trials every child born into the Istaville family must go through. Once a baby is born, they are thrown into the Cradle of Blades in the Shadow Forest and must crawl the entire test path filled with swords, heading to the opposite shore to receive the baptism of the Mo River. It is said that the water of the Mo River can make a child's body as strong as steel. However, only a limited number of children can obtain its effects. Therefore, to be the first to reach the Mo River and receive its baptism, one must move straight ahead and pass through the spiral blade obstacles. In my previous life, as an illegitimate child, I was ostracized by the direct line and failed to obtain this power. But this time, I will be the first to arrive and enjoy the power of the Mo River all by myself. I unexpectedly reached the finish line. Under the shocked gazes of the crowd, I plunged headfirst into the Mo River. The water of the Mo River seeped into my wounds, but I did not feel pain. Instead, I felt a steady stream of power pouring into my body. This effect appeared in only a few minutes. If I can absorb all of this energy, I'll leave those worthless direct line brats far behind. To absorb the power faster, I directly opened my mouth and gulped down dozens of pounds of Mo River water. At this moment, I was already showing signs of drowning, but as long as I still had even a shred of consciousness, there was no way I would rise to the surface easily. The steward on the shore told my father that 30 minutes had already passed. My father on the shore also revealed a chilling smile, thinking that a genius seen only once in 100 years was about to appear in the Istaville family. But the attendants began chattering worriedly, afraid I had been underwater so long that I might drown, and kept urging the family head to pull me out quickly. At this point, my father believed it was time for me to come up. The family could not lose a genius that appeared only once in a century. So my father said to the underwater me that I could come up now, but seeing that I still did not react, he directly dragged my nearly drowned body out of the water. He looked at me in astonishment. "Soaking in the Mo River wasn't enough? It looks like you drank a lot too. Even your teeth have grown out?" A satisfied smile appeared on my father's face. As expected of my son, Victor's son. "Even if you drown, you still want to absorb all the power of the Mo River. Perhaps you can raise the family to an unprecedented new height." My goal really was also for the sake of the family, but for the sake of making the family disappear forever. When I woke up again, I was already in the nursery room. Since I was still alive, that meant I had successfully absorbed the power of the Mo River. Just as I wanted to see what was different about me, I saw a maid holding a gift box and sneaking to my bedside, muttering, "Why would Madame put this thing in young Master Galer's cradle?" But as an illegitimate child like me, there should be no one who would give me gifts. It seemed that my performance in the test had threatened certain people, and they had already started eagerly trying to get rid of me. Suddenly, the box was pushed open by whatever was inside. 2 bloody black mamba snakes suddenly slithered out of it. To get rid of me, they really would stop at nothing. They even brought out such rare venomous snakes. If this were my previous life, I might already have died young. But as someone reborn, how could I possibly fall to these 2 little things? This was the perfect chance to test the power I gained in the Mo River. I struck first, grabbing both snakes hard at the vital spot behind their heads. I bared the steel teeth I had grown in the Mo River. At this moment, I became even more determined to destroy the Istaville family. At dawn the next day, all the servants were shocked frozen by the sight in the cradle. Scattered all around my sleeping body were the remains of venomous snakes. Clearly, yesterday had been a one-sided slaughter. After that day, every servant on the night shift was executed, but in the end, the cause of the snake's appearance was never discovered. I alone saw through the whole truth. In the blink of an eye, 8 years had passed, and I had entered the learning stage. With the genius-like abilities from my previous life, these classes were child's play to me. But when I heard that at this point in time, my father 32 years ago was already a swordsmanship master, I still felt a little pressure. But with the memories of 2 lifetimes, recovering to my former strength before the coming-of-age ceremony should not be a problem. Although I usually kept a low profile, the legends about me still made many people unconvinced. After class, 3 yellow-haired brats shoved me into a corner. These 3 would later be known as the Trident of Istaville. They were also the ones who pinned on me the accusation of colluding with the demon race. If these guys were given another 10 years, they would all become troublesome opponents. I can only kill you in the cradle right now. Suddenly, the eldest blonde pulled out a dagger and pointed it at me. Ah, I heard you stayed in the Mo River for a full 30 minutes. The 3 of us don't really believe it, so we wanted to test it ourselves. Then the second blonde covered my nose and mouth from behind and said, "As long as you can hold your breath in my hands for 10 minutes, we'll let you go." They say children's methods are even crueler. That saying really is true. Fine, then I'll play with you properly. 1 minute passed, 5 minutes passed, 12 minutes passed. Only now did they seem to realize they had picked the wrong person to mess with, and they started discussing whether they should let me go. But you were the ones who provoked me first. How could I possibly let you leave so easily? I immediately bit off the second blonde's index finger in one bite, then looked at them grimly and said, "Didn't you want to witness my ability?" Seeing his third brother's finger bitten off, the eldest blonde raised his dagger and stabbed it toward me. Who would have thought I wouldn't even bother dodging, just in time to show him the power the Mo River water gave me. A fierce light flashed in my eyes. "Then let me play with you properly." I instantly smashed my fist hard into the eldest blonde's face. Seeing this, the third brat still wanted to avenge the other 2, but before he could even strike once, I floored him with a vicious whipping kick. Seeing that all 3 of them had lost the strength to fight back, I picked up the dagger on the ground, threw it in front of them, and said, "I can give you 1 chance to reform yourselves, but only 1 person can leave. As for who that is, you'll decide it yourselves." After the 3 stared at one another, they began a brutal mutual slaughter. From then on, the so-called Trident of Istaville ceased to exist. Inside the study of the head of the Istaville family, the steward was reporting on the recent situation around the family's territory, and at the same time reporting my results of easily taking first place in every competition. But when they discussed the practical combat test 3 days later, he still could not help mentioning my fight with the triplet young masters. Although the physical injuries of all 3 had healed completely, they seemed to have suffered permanent psychological trauma, and from then on, the 3 became strangers to each other. The family head was also surprised that I had defeated many opponents while outnumbered. Not long after, I was summoned to the study. The family head did not beat around the bush and directly asked about the crippling of my triplet elder brothers. Was it related to me? Seeing the family head so straightforward, I admitted it directly as well. But I heard they received treatment in time and recovered. Though their individual combat ability is somewhat inferior, they are triplets after all, and with their Trinity technique, their strength is outstanding among those of the same realm. They are also key targets of the family's cultivation. Don't you think your actions were wrong? But things had already reached this point, and father believed I should reflect on having harmed my elder brothers. Hearing such an answer, my expression instantly darkened. I alone could defeat all 3 of them, which only proved that I was stronger. In a world where the strong are respected, can the strong really be wrong? I already summoned your brothers just now. They said they would forgive you. Even so, do you still feel no guilt? My thoughts were pulled back to my previous life. A woman whose family had been exterminated by the Istaville family found Victor and said she had already forgiven him. She became a nun and even held a mass for Victor. But after hearing that, Victor said, "As I remember, I believe forgiveness is just an excuse used by the weak who are powerless to take revenge. The strong reign supreme. Weakness is a sin." Father was very satisfied with my answer. "It seems you've already understood the Istaville family creed." To reward me, father allowed me to go to the food warehouse and take any snacks I liked. Just as I was about to step out the door, father reminded me that in the practical combat assessment 3 days later, I'd better not lose to the direct line. Sure enough, as an illegitimate child, I was still considered inferior in the family head's heart. inside the warehouse filled with dazzling goods. When the steward learned that what I wanted was chocolate, he led me to a shelf piled with chocolate. It's specially reserved for nobles. Ordinary people can't eat this. But my next words left everyone present with bewildered expressions. What I need is unprocessed cacao beans. Although the steward did not understand what I wanted with such unprocessed goods, he still ordered the chef to bring over the most flavorful variety. This is the intensely flavored variety, scarlet beans. A single bean can make 100 grams of chocolate. After I tasted it, it was truly hard to swallow. These unprocessed beans were absolutely not something ordinary people could eat. Seeing the bitterness on my face, the chef behind me asked, "Would you like me to process this first and then send it to your room?" I refused immediately. I wasn't taking this for eating, but to use these scarlet beans in the practical combat test 3 days later to help me hunt monsters. As for what would happen that day, it would become an unprecedented event in Istaville history. 3 days later, inside the practical combat test grounds, Chief Instructor Kasloff was explaining the rules of the skill assessment, saying the rules this time were simple. Only 2 points. Survive for 1 month in the land of Hima and hunt powerful monsters. Surviving is worth 10 points. Surviving without any injuries is worth 30 points. Surviving alone is worth 50 points. And capturing a monster and surviving is worth 70 points. In addition, snatching someone else's badge can earn bonus points. At this moment Kasloff mentioned the unopened forbidden zone of the land of Hima, the Hell Mountain Range. He advised everyone to move only within the designated zone. When the Hell Mountain Range was mentioned, I became excited. It's been a long time since I've been here. When the bell in the instructor's hand rang, the practical assessment officially began. Some people rushed straight toward the advantageous terrain from the previous assessment, while others followed behind other people, looking to seize points by opportunity. As for me, relying on the memories of my previous life, I moved about as if strolling through my own backyard, and found a geomatically perfect spot near the edge of the forbidden zone. To ensure the safety of every student, an instructor would be secretly assigned to follow each one. Originally, he wanted to witness the true strength of the legendary genius, yet while the other students were busy slaughtering one another, I was building my temporary shelter. While the other students were swinging swords and hunting monsters, I had already prepared to sleep. This series of actions made the instructor wonder what exactly I was here for, and even question whether the rumors of me being a genius were true. Little did he know that everything I was doing was only for show. Finally, after observing me for a while, he felt I was doing nothing but resting and recovering, which was truly boring, so he figured I would stay there the whole time and no longer needed protection. As soon as I saw my watcher had left, I immediately took out a bag of scarlet beans and threw them into the fire. The method of using these red beans to mask the smell of blood on my body was something one of my underlings told me in my previous life. Then, after setting over 100 traps around the area, the hunt officially began. So I stepped directly into the unopened zone of the land of Hima. From the burnt smell drifting from the nearby tree branches, I was certain that what I wanted was here. At that moment, my eyes suddenly lit up. There on the ground was a pile of self-igniting feces, and there was only one kind of monster that could produce such a thing. It was the Hellhound, a B+ ranked dangerous beast, and also the target monster I had come for this time. As long as I took the Hellhound's head and got first place in this practical combat test, it would be ridiculously easy. I knew it well. In my previous life, even at 18, I still could not defeat it alone. But now, at only 8 years old, I felt no fear at all, because I knew the Hellhound's 3 fatal weaknesses. The first weakness: it can only charge straight forward in a direct line, and has difficulty keeping up with sudden turns. As long as I make good use of this, I can continuously drain its stamina. Its second weakness is that the Hellhound fears water. No matter how deep the water is, when they see water, they will choose to avoid it. This can greatly slow it down and severely restrict its movements. The final weakness is that, like all canines, chocolate is lethal poison to them. Canines attack by opening their jaws and tearing prey with their teeth. At that moment, I can seize the chance to throw the red beans into its mouth, and that is also the most fatal weakness of all. After that, all I need to do is quietly wait for the poison to take effect. After all, one red bean can make 100 liters of chocolate, so the effect speaks for itself. It seems that even a hound from hell still can't defeat chocolate. But a hellhound is, after all, a B+ rank monster, and its body structure is quite special. Its hard ribs constantly protect its heart, so there is only one way to deal with it: attack its lower body and smash its kidneys. Suddenly, a strand of blue essence drifted from the monster's wound. This was precisely the energy gained from killing monsters, which can rapidly increase one's strength and make the physical body stronger. At that moment, I raised my hand and swung the short sword in my grip, and it felt lighter than before. At this rate, recovering all the power of my previous life before the coming-of-age ceremony was far from impossible for an 8-year-old child to kill a B+ rank dangerous monster. I wonder what expression Victor would have when he learns about it. Looking at the fallen hellhound, first place in this practical combat test was mine for sure. Of course, I had already thought of the reward I wanted for getting first place, something I wouldn't even have dared dream of in my previous life. Suddenly, I heard footsteps slowly approaching from behind. 4 more hellhounds had arrived behind me. They must have heard their companion's screams and come to avenge it. I immediately swung my sword and chopped off the previous one's head, warning them that I was not someone they could provoke. But after I did that, the expressions of the 4 hellhounds suddenly showed fear, and they even lowered their heads and backed away. That was when I realized something was wrong. After all, hellhounds are prey that would rather die than submit. Faced with an 8-year-old child, they should not have acted like this. I immediately turned my head to look closely, and saw that behind me stood a 3-headed dog wreathed in the aura of hell. Cerberus, the gatekeeper hound of hell, an A+ rank 3-headed dog monster. How had a creature that lived deep in the mountains come to the outskirts? Suddenly, I noticed that this thing was bleeding. Looking carefully, there were traces of arrows and wounds all over its body. The only ones capable of injuring it to this extent were the barbarian tribes. At this moment, I kept calming myself. If I could hunt this Cerberus, I would move one step closer to regaining the power of my previous life. Since I was facing a heavily injured A+ rank monster, there was no longer any need to hide my strength. I swiftly coated my sword with a layer of sword aura. The abilities of a swordsmanship master were enough to deal with it in its wounded state, so I burst forward and charged at Cerberus. Just when I thought this strike would surely hit its head, Cerberus counterattacked me from the side at lightning speed. Fortunately, my reflexes were still sharp, and I retreated to evade its fierce assault. It seemed that even when wounded, its combat power had not dropped much. In my previous life, I could easily crush Cerberus. In this life, I can do the same. Just as I was gathering strength for another attack, Cerberus seemed to sense my provocation and immediately opened its abyss-like maw, unleashing a continuous series of terrifying roars. Then in the very next second, Cerberus suddenly launched an attack, and my sword was actually bitten to pieces in one bite. And while I was still stunned, my body was sent flying by one of its giant paws. Only then did I truly realize the gap in strength. For my current 8-year-old self to challenge Cerberus was still far too early. Even with the steel body granted by the Mo River, though I managed to endure its attack, my internal organs were nearly shattered by the impact. As the monster drew closer and closer, I kept reminding myself in my mind that I absolutely must not lose consciousness. Suddenly, Cerberus opened its bloody jaws and lunged at me. I immediately forced my injured body to dodge, otherwise the mangled tree behind me would have been me. Seeing that the situation was bad, I remembered that in my previous life I had one more trick, a final move in life and death moments. It seemed there was no need to hide it now. Among the 36 stratagems, fleeing is the best. If it weren't for the fact that it was wounded right now, I might already have become food in its mouth. I really ought to thank the barbarian tribe. Suddenly, not far ahead, an iron grate appeared. As long as I could hold out until I reached the perfect hunting trap I had prepared earlier, I would have a chance to defeat Cerberus. Seeing Cerberus getting closer and closer behind me, I immediately leaped forward and jumped over the first trap. And just as I was about to make intimate contact with the monster's bloody jaws, it finally triggered the trap when it landed. The weight of its body instantly crushed the mechanism, and countless blades pierced through its body. Welcome to the Cradle of Blades. The trap, originally prepared to deal with hellhounds, had unexpectedly captured a Cerberus. Very soon, the red bean water smeared onto it took effect. The dog heads on both sides of the monster were the first to die from poisoning. It seemed chocolate truly worked on all canines. Could it be that because it was a high-rank monster, it wouldn't collapse all at once? The middle head had not been affected too severely yet. I held a long spear in my hand and condensed my magic into it, sprinted for 100 meters, and threw it with every ounce of strength I had. But when it struck Cerberus's final dog head, it was actually deflected. As the Mount of Hades, Lord of the Underworld, when had Cerberus ever endured such provocation? It immediately dragged its scarred body toward me, while at the same time, I was silently counting numbers in my heart. 2 steps. When Cerberus reached me, it happened to be the 7th step, and the poison attacked its heart and made it collapse. So the rumor about the black mamba snakes was true. Once bitten, after 7 steps, death is guaranteed. Fortunately, I had secretly hidden away a little when I was a child, and today it proved extremely useful. After absorbing Cerberus's energy, I was troubled by how I could convince the examiners that I had really killed an A+ rank monster. Suddenly, I thought of an even more important piece of information. The three-headed hound is a monster with the habit of guarding its territory. Clearly, there was a dungeon nearby that it had been protecting. A dungeon was bound to contain mysterious treasures, and powerful monsters would also dwell inside. Then I picked up the feces of both Cerberus and the hellhound and smeared them over my body to mask my scent. And by taking advantage of Cerberus's status in the land of Hima, I could prevent surprise attacks from other monsters. Afterward, following Cerberus's original route, I quickly found the dungeon hidden in the depths. I remembered this place from my previous life, but it wasn't discovered until 10 years later. By then, the treasure inside had already been taken away, but now things were different. Behind the stench, there was the smell of magic. Clearly, the thing inside was still there. I was very curious about what kind of treasure was waiting for me. As I continued to go deeper, ruby ore veins could be seen all over the walls. This place definitely seemed to connect to the Hell Mountain range. At that moment, a dazzling beam of light suddenly shot toward me from the depths of the cave. The brilliant light made it hard for me, standing in darkness, to open my eyes. I was certain that was where the dungeon lay. Sure enough, just as I expected, what appeared there was a ruby emitting magical power. So it was this magic-filled ruby that had illuminated the entire underground area. As I examined the surroundings, I was drawn to a skeleton lying on the ground. This skeleton appeared to have been stabbed by blades, its entire body covered with wounds and dried brown bloodstains. Judging by its condition, it had likely been there for many years. I then picked up the suicide note lying on the ground. From the handwriting on the letter, I could tell this person also belonged to the Istaville family. At the beginning of the letter, he warned future generations not to make the same mistake he had. They had heard that the legendary underground castle contained countless rare treasures, so he and his younger brother traveled together into the depths of the Hell Mountain range to search for it. By accident, they came upon this bottomless cave and felt this must be that legendary place. Here, they endured countless trials, killed every monster, and conquered the dungeon. But the final challenge to unlock the treasure left them pondering for a full 3 years. 1 person. Before entering, 1 person. After entering, 2 people. When leaving, only 1 person. Finally, one day after 3 years, they arrived at a conclusion. That was that since they were identical twins, in their mother's womb, they counted as 1 person. They truly were 2 people, so if they wanted to obtain this treasure, they had to eliminate the other person. Although he took his younger brother's head in battle, the ruby still did not change at all. Looking at the younger brother he had killed with his own hands, he ultimately could not accept this reality, abandoned the treasure, and chose to flee from reality because he was convinced the dungeon had been created by demons to mock humanity. After reading the letter in my hand, I was utterly speechless. If it were true, then as someone who entered alone, wouldn't I not even have the chance to participate in the trial? In my previous life, there was no dungeon I couldn't solve. At that moment, the shadow behind me gave me a hint, and I already had the answer in my heart. I immediately threw a punch and smashed the red ruby on the altar. The tunnel I came through had no light at all, so that was 1 person. Once I reached the Great Hall, the light emitted by the ruby cast my shadow and created 2 people. Then as long as I shattered the ruby and returned the hall to darkness, only I would remain. As the shattered ruby slowly rose, what emerged from within was actually the demon sword that appeared only in legends. Even in my previous life, I had only heard of it. At the beginning of ancient times, there were 7 demons who committed every evil imaginable, throwing the world into misery. To prevent an even greater disaster, the heads of the 7 great families stepped forward and each fought against a demon. The demon faced by the first patriarch of the Istaville family was Beelzebub, the gluttonous fly king. After 81 days and nights of fierce battle, he was finally killed and sealed within the territory of Corvus. This demon sword was formed from Beelzebub's corpse. It was said that the sword later fell into the hands of the demon race, causing countless people to be pushed into despair during the demon wars. But that won't happen in this life, because now it belongs to me. Suddenly, the demon sword transformed into energy and surged into my right hand. In an instant, the blade actually grew out from within my body. At the same time, I felt power filling my entire body, as expected of a demon sword made from a demon's corpse. From now on, it will be my strongest trump card. After looking around and finding nothing else of value, I prepared to leave. Suddenly, a powerful wave of dizziness struck me. More accurately, it was hunger. I guessed it was probably because of the demon sword. After all, it hadn't eaten for hundreds of years while staying here. When I supported myself and walked out of the cave, I seemed to smell food. Could it be that the demon sword had sharpened my sense of smell? The demon sword actually led me, rushing rapidly in one direction. Sure enough, it had found the B+ rank hellhound I had hunted. The blade instantly stabbed into the monster's body. As it went through the process of absorbing it, the dizzy feeling in me gradually began to disappear. Could it be that the life drained from the forest and soil of the Hell Mountain range was also caused by it? And after absorbing the B+ rank hellhound, I actually obtained that hellhound's skill. Blood burst skill effect. Even the smallest wound can cause the enemy's blood to keep flowing, and there are still 2 remaining slots. It seemed that every demon had one fixed ability of its own, while the demon sword could absorb other skills and make them its own. Suddenly, the demon sword forcibly dragged me toward the side. Apparently, it wasn't satisfied with a B-rank hellhound. The corpse of the A+ rank Cerberus at the side was even more appealing to it. At this rate of absorption, there might not be any prey left for the practical combat test. I immediately rebuked it angrily. If you're inside my body, then you listen to me. After absorbing Cerberus, the remaining 2 slots were also filled. I obtained Cerberus's skills, Burn and Bleeding. Just as I was wondering whether Cerberus's higher rank was why it gave 2 skills, when I looked carefully at the 3rd skill, I was instantly speechless. F-rank Mole skill, High-Speed Regeneration. So it had also absorbed the rat gnawing on Cerberus's corpse. The prey for the practical combat test was also ready, so I just waited leisurely for the test to end. Just a few days after the practical combat test had ended, the young hunters gradually returned. They brought their respective spoils with them, and along with them came all kinds of evaluations and rewards. But when everyone saw the prey I brought back, they were stunned beyond belief. No one had imagined that an 8-year-old child could kill an A+ rank monster. Very soon, this matter reached the ears of the family head. To kill a Cerberus at the age of 8, something even the family's guard knights found troublesome, had never once appeared in the family's history. The steward was equally astonished, saying that such a formidable young master was not even from the direct line. At this moment, however, the family head said he wanted to change the old way of raising hunting dogs used by previous heads. Bloodline should not be considered so important. Whether royal blood or slave blood, as long as one had enough strength, one should be cultivated properly. No matter how good a dog's bloodline is, some will always fail to measure up. Could it be that young Master Gaylor had even changed the family head's personality? At this moment, I was summoned into the family head's study, and Victor, as always, went straight to the point. I heard that in the practical combat test, you killed the 3-headed hound Cerberus. What exactly happened? I put on a lucky expression and said, it was thanks to the chocolate father rewarded me with last time. As everyone knows, chocolate is poison to all canines. I only had a little left, and that was how I got lucky enough to hunt it. Then why didn't you answer the steward properly when he asked you earlier? Seeing Victor continue to press me, I had no choice but to flatter him. He is not my master. I belong to the Istaville family, and I only await the orders of the family head. Seeing me flatter him so well, Victor believed my explanation and directly rewarded me with all the monster corpses I had hunted. In addition, I also received the reward for first place, allowing me to request any prize I wanted. But my next answer left them all shocked. I wanted to enter the family's Senra library to study. Hearing my reply, Father's face darkened once again. Do you know that this library is a place only the patriarch and the direct line are allowed to enter? Then I said that if it wasn't allowed, it was fine, though in my heart I was already calculating how to sneak inside. Suddenly, Victor's next words shocked me beyond belief. You may enter, and you may also go deeper into the library. There, you'll find the book of the 6th sword technique of the Istaville family. At that moment, I began to wonder whether rebirth could really change a person's personality. In my previous life, anyone with the label illegitimate child in their name could at most cultivate up to the 4th sword technique. But now was no time to celebrate too early. At present, Father's level had already reached the 7th sword technique. By the time I was executed in my previous life, he had already cultivated up to the 9th sword technique. But this reincarnated me would definitely surpass him. Because I know of a forgotten sword manual containing the first patriarch's insights into swordsmanship. As long as I fully comprehend everything in it, I will break directly into the 10th sword technique. So I hurried straight to the Senra library. The sword manuals I had desperately wanted to learn in my previous life were all here. To ensure the hunting dogs would not bare their fangs at their masters, they were absolutely forbidden from learning any sword techniques beyond the 4th move. And now what stood before my eyes was exactly the 6th sword technique Father had recommended for me to study. Could it be that Victor allowed me to read this technique because he thought an 8-year-old child could never understand its contents? Then he had miscalculated the variable that was me. In my previous life, I had already mastered the first 4 forms to perfection. So I skipped directly past the front part and rapidly flipped further back. Soon I comprehended the secrets of the 5th and 6th sword techniques, then walked deeper into the library. Suddenly, something in an inconspicuous corner caught my attention. Curved Disc Stealth Assault. This was written by the first patriarch of the Istaville family. Inside, it not only recorded the basic cultivation methods of sword techniques 1 through 9, but it even contained the long-lost 10th sword technique. As for why no one had been able to learn it, that was because 7 pages of its contents were missing. But now I understood the true value of this book. In my previous life, while carrying out a mission near the Hell Mountain Range, I accidentally discovered 1 page in a dungeon. To find the remaining contents and break through himself, Father unleashed all his hunting dogs. After learning that the remaining contents were hidden among the 7 great families, he began declaring war on the other families. After sacrificing countless hunting dogs, all the missing pages were finally gathered together. Yet in my previous life, for reasons unknown, he searched through the entire library and still failed to find the book that matched them. So he vented his anger on us instead, causing me to lose many brothers. Now that I have been reborn, I will never let that happen again. Because I clearly remember the contents on those 7 pages. When the time comes, I will directly break through the 4th realm and cultivate to a height no one in the family has ever reached. While I focused and immersed myself in the contents of the book, time slowly passed into the evening, and I finally memorized the entire book. Then I closed my eyes and began to meditate. My body instantly entered the sea of consciousness, and at the same time, an enemy manifested across from me. At once I gathered magical power in my palm, turned my arm into a substantial sword, and then unleashed the first Istaville sword technique, striking toward the enemy before me. Immediately after came the 2nd sword technique and the 3rd sword technique, followed swiftly by the 4th skill, Berserk Charge. What came next was the 5th sword technique that would allow me to break past myself. As I recalled my father's heartlessness in my previous life, the exclusion from my direct line brothers, my painstaking devotion in service to the family, and yet they still would not allow me to cultivate the 5th sword technique simply because my identity was that of an illegitimate child, I lunged forward with my body. The enemy before my eyes suddenly turned into Victor. The anger accumulated over 2 lifetimes transformed into a powerful strike, and in an instant, it pierced through Victor's body. In this life, I will definitely tear all of you to pieces. At the same time, I broke out of the sea of consciousness. At that moment, I finally revealed a smile appropriate for my age, because it seemed I had already mastered the 5th sword technique. It looked like before my 15th coming of age ceremony, restoring the power of my previous life would be more than enough. Then I took out a magnifying glass from my pocket, and used the principle of focusing light to set this sword manual on fire. From this point on, no one else in this world would ever be able to break through to the 10th sword technique. But just then, the guards smelled the burning scent and immediately ran upstairs. I scratched my head and explained that I had accidentally burned a useless book. Hearing that, the 2 of them were relieved. If some relatively important book had been burned, then even the lives of 3 generations of them would not be enough to make up for it. The scene shifted, and I came to Father's room and told him that after studying, I could now feel a blazing sensation in my body. Father and the steward froze on the spot the moment they heard this, because that meant I had already stepped into the domain of the sword. Of course, this was far from my full strength, and in order to test what level I had currently reached, Father arranged a duel for me against a C-rank beastman that had already been starved for 2.5 months. At this moment, the spectators all held their breath, because for an 8-year-old child, this was certainly not something he should have been able to deal with. But to everyone's utter surprise, the very instant the beastman had its chains removed and let out a wild roar, I flashed over with lightning speed, and even severed one of the beastman's arms. And because of the influence of the blood burst skill from the B+ rank hellhound, even a beastman with high-speed regeneration was left helpless. Looking at the fear in its eyes, it probably never imagined, even in death, why it could no longer regenerate. With a wave of my hand, a blood-red magical power attached itself to my sword blade. One thrust instantly ended the beastman's life. This time Father truly could no longer sit still. From my performance at the beginning to this instant kill of a C-rank monster, I was undoubtedly a genius seen only once in 10,000 years, comprehending the first sword technique at only 8 years old. Seeing this, I smiled at Father and said, "The beastman seems too weak. Please arrange a tougher duel for me." Originally, I thought that by showing off my abilities so much, father would send me to a special school for further training, but unexpectedly, he and the steward began discussing a monster they had captured 10 days earlier, a B-rank giant troll that had been starved for 2.5 years. Once the chains restraining the monster were released, the battle was about to begin. Relying on my agile footwork, I continuously dodged its swift attacks, but I gave up counterattacking again and again because I knew that a B-rank troll possessed an absurd skill, super regeneration. If I could not deal it a fatal wound, then any attack would become meaningless. That was why when hunting trolls, one had to formulate a meticulous plan. Although I had already found its fatal weakness, I had fallen into another problem. Exactly how much of my true strength should I use in order to kill the troll instantly without making father suspicious? At that moment, an idea suddenly flashed through my mind. If I could perform this duel as a moment of sudden enlightenment, instead of immediately killing the monster, then not only could I dispel father's suspicions, I could also justifiably reveal a bit more of my strength. Seeing the troll charge at me again, this time I did not choose to dodge. Instead, I used the first sword technique of Istavil, and hacked a huge gash into its shoulder. After the troll's wound was just about to finish regenerating, father began to urge me to give up. Clearly, I still could not deal with it in my current state, but I asked father for one more chance. If I don't kill it next, then I'll give up. Killing intent spread through my eyes. The moment father nodded, I transferred my magic power onto my sword blade. It was all to pretend at this exact moment that I had mastered the second sword technique. Sure enough, just as I had expected, the controlled power sliced cleanly through the troll's thick skin, splitting its head and body apart. Under the incredulous gazes of everyone, I once again gave them a new understanding of me with the posture of a genius. In the days that followed, because my strength was far too great, students my own age, and even older upperclassmen, did not dare get too close to me, but none of that mattered. What mattered was that father was shocked after seeing my performance. Up to now, the strength I had shown was only at the level of an intermediate expert within the realm of the sword. But in reality, with my current strength, I had already comprehended the fifth sword technique of Istavil. And with the super regeneration I had just obtained, compared with a beginner-level professor, I was not inferior in the least. At that moment, the triplets I had bullied before came to find me. I had thought they had come to settle scores with me, but unexpectedly, because my performance in the duel had been so cool, the three of them had become my loyal fans. Goosebumps instantly swept over my entire body. Thinking back to how I was killed in my previous life because of them, I wanted nothing more than to kill them immediately. Yet just as I was about to beat them up again, the steward came to find me, and told me what father had ordered for me. At that very moment, the head of the Istavil family, and Ickley, the vice-head of the Rello family, were discussing how to hold this year's joint training. Although the relationship between the two great families was not harmonious, there was once an emperor who had said this: Istavil is the family of the sword, while the Rello family puts magic above all. Swordsmanship and magic should exist as complements to each other. Only then can the nation break into its most prosperous stage. From then onward, every year, as long as they were children between 8 and 15, they had to participate in the joint training of the two great families. At this time Ickley asked, "I heard your Istavil has given birth to an unparalleled genius? Well, our Rello family happens to have one too." Then he called over the genius girl from their family, Bino, who was also his most beloved little niece. But he had already planned his strategy. Knowing his niece's explosive temper, he wanted to use her to suppress Victor, the head of the Istavil family. Bino completely ignored any difference in seniority and immediately unleashed a barrage of insults at Victor. "You shameless or thief, return our ruby mine at once." So the reason the two great families had come into conflict all originated from the mining rights to the ruby mine. Seeing this, Ickley hypocritically tried to persuade his niece that she should not curse people like that. Fortunately, Victor did not get angry, merely thinking this was simply a child who had not been disciplined properly. Bino showed no sign of backing down. As a magical prodigy, she needed enough ruby ore to conduct magical experiments. Ickley hurriedly stopped her from continuing, because a ferocious beast was desperately suppressing the anger in his heart. A single sentence broke the stiff atmosphere. "What doesn't belong to you can never be changed." I pushed open the door and entered with the steward. After seeing me, Ickley began sizing up my strength, but he had not expected that his niece had already left her seat. Bino questioned what gave me the right to say that, because ruby mines were naturally tied to great magical families. At that moment, I was inwardly stunned, because the girl standing before me was actually the strongest mage 20 years in the future, someone who would even control the royal family and be honored by the world as the authoritative fire Valkyrie. So I mocked her, saying she had come all this way to our territory just to throw a tantrum. Bino instantly flew into a rage and immediately began gathering ice magic in both hands. At first, I thought she wanted to spar with me, but unexpectedly, she only restored a terrain map of the two families. At that moment, the place Bino pointed to was exactly the area at the boundary between the two cities where the ruby mine was being extracted. She explained that part of the ore should belong to their Rello family and that Istavil had no right to monopolize all of it. I told her that to us, rubies were worth less than scrap iron. The ultimate purpose of our mining was to expand our territory. To more directly demonstrate who truly had the right to mine the ruby ore, Bino extended her hand from her family's territory into Istavil's domain. The implication was obvious. The Rello family was the stronger one. So I grabbed Bino's hand, and then pulled a small knife from my pocket. Anyone who dares invade our territory will be killed without mercy. But just as the blade was about to touch her, I had already expected Ikli to intervene, so I let go and explained that in the Iron Sword family, such blades were just toys, completely incapable of causing harm. Afterward, I said goodbye to Ikli and the others, and Father also said the topic should return to the main point, which was the joint training of this year's geniuses from the two great families. Bino and I stood on the arena. As the bell signaling the start of the match rang, Bino rapidly made hand signs, chanting fire, lightning, and ice spells. As I saw the three kinds of magic attack me at the same time, I mocked her and said she had better focus on one thing. Then I used nimble footwork to dodge them, harshly slapping the faces of those who thought knowing many kinds of magic made them geniuses. Suddenly, Bino chanted an earth spell, and a wall of earth rose up from the arena floor, only for me to smash it to pieces with a single punch, unable to hinder my advance at all. But because I did not want to injure the future strongest mage, my counterattack was nothing more than flicking her forehead. At this point, the gap in strength between us was already obvious, yet Bino still refused to admit defeat and immediately summoned two more earth walls. Actually, magic of this level was simply an insult to human intelligence. Wouldn't it be easy enough just to go around them? In order not to damage her self-esteem too much, I decided to be the most dedicated actor possible, while carefully controlling my strength. And after taking one of my punches, the two earth walls were only blasted open with a small hole. Then I flicked her forehead once more. But even when victory and defeat were already clear, Bino still used fire magic against me. I figured this was probably why she could become the authoritative Valkyrie of later years. Stubborn, proud, and never willing to give up lightly. I heard the voices coming from behind me on the arena, so I stopped pressing the attack and stepped back. In the very next second, a huge fireball spell suddenly appeared behind me. This was the solution I had thought of, to make the match end in a draw, with no one utterly overpowering the other. And after the two of us were both hit by the fireball, Bino's clothes were burned away until only the important parts remained covered. So I took off my upper garment and gave it to her. And the result of the duel turned out just as I had expected. Because of unavoidable circumstances, our match was declared a draw. But I believed that at this moment, everyone would still consider it a victory for Istavil. Yet on the way back, Father still criticized me, because I had not used my full strength. On the battlefield, showing mercy was a grave taboo. He warned me that whether it was women or family, as long as they posed a threat to me, I had to strike back. At that moment, I was suddenly taken aback. In my previous life, after his first wife died, Father had paid no attention to me, his illegitimate son, and could even be said to have treated me like discarded trash. I told him that I had another plan in mind. After all, Istavil's priority was territorial expansion, but the regions of the land of Hima and the ruby mine had long been threatened by barbarians and hellhounds. If we could borrow the strength of the Rello family, we could minimize our losses while expanding our territory. Father was extremely satisfied with my plan, not knowing that I had merely proposed it ahead of him based on the memories of my previous life. When we arrived at the corner, Ikli came to find me again. He knew very well that Istavil's strength far exceeded that of the Rello family, so he decided to handle the issues of land and ruby mines through peace. By arranging an inter-family marriage, the eldest son of Istavil would become engaged to their genius, Bino. The moment he finished speaking, Bino rejected Ikli, saying she would never agree to marry someone 17 years older than herself. If she were to be engaged, it had to be with someone close to her own age and whose strength she acknowledged. I guessed that the person he meant was probably me, because ever since entering the room, his eyes had not left me once. At the same time, Ikli also guessed his niece's little thoughts, saying that a girl of her noble status could hardly marry an illegitimate child of impure blood. Victor did not want to get involved, so he handed the choice over to me, and I accepted the proposal. But Ikli was the first to oppose it, so he decided to personally test whether I was qualified to become his family's son-in-law. The scene shifted, and the two of us arrived at the duel arena. Ikli chanted 3 kinds of magic spells, and refined a kettle out of thin air. He said proudly that he would duel me while holding the kettle above his head, and if I could make even 1 drop of water spill from it, I would win. I knew Ikli's strength very well. The probability of winning in a direct confrontation was 10%, while assassination from the shadows would be 50%. But I guess that father had probably accepted this uneven match just to see my current level of strength, which made things simple. As long as I could meet father's expectations, that would be enough. So I drew my sword and rushed forward. Suddenly, Bino reminded me that I absolutely must not confront her uncle head-on. It turned out Ikli had long thought of a method to deal with swordsmen, using a defensive shield spell with incredibly high durability. An ordinary sword could never possibly break through it. Right after that, he began chanting a fire spell, and huge fireballs started forming above his head. But just as he hurled them at me, Bino reproached him for using additional magic, leaving Ikli not even knowing whose side he was supposed to be on. Even so, the memories of my previous life told me that Ikli was not unbeatable. If I could seize his 2 weaknesses, I could easily make him lower his guard, and perhaps even kill him. With that, I raised my sword and repeatedly attacked the magic shield. Seeing this, Ikli advised me not to waste my strength. A spell of this level, even if I really was a genius, still could not be broken if my weapon was inadequate. But the moment he finished speaking, in the next second, cracks actually appeared in the magic shield. For that, Ikli greatly admired my concentration, as I had managed to strike precisely the exact same spot 23 times. And after I delivered my final blow, my sword also shattered because it could no longer bear the pressure. Little did he know that this was the final step of my plan. Father and Bino beside us were both astonished, because at this moment, while Ikli was still muttering that I was too weak to marry his niece, the kettle above his head had actually begun to drip water, which meant I had passed this strength test. I shot him a look of disdain, because even until death he would never have imagined that relaxing his guard the moment he saw my broken sword would become the greatest mistake that made him lose. At this moment, Bino's face was flushed red. We had only known each other for 2.5 minutes, yet an inter-family marriage for the sake of peace had really been settled. 7 years passed quickly. On the Istaville training grounds, the once immature children had already become spirited young men. One look at their sharp eyes was enough to tell they had become qualified hunting dogs. At this moment, they were working together to hunt an A-rank horned bear, and this was also the final examination that would determine whether they could graduate successfully. Now, even the trident that I had once defeated could still play a major role in team combat. Their strength had never been poor to begin with, I had merely forcibly changed the direction of their evolution. At last, that horned bear exhausted all the strength in its body, and all that remained was for the many hunting dogs to finish it off. With this hunting experience, each of them reached the lowest level of expert. 7 long years of training thus came to an end at this moment. But the instructor still reminded them that there was a huge difference between a wild horned bear and one locked in a cage. So whenever they faced any monster they had previously defeated, they had to maintain the highest vigilance at all times. Because death is closer to you than you think. After both sides completed their final salute, they began choosing their future paths. Within the Istaville family, there were 7 great knight orders, and each had its own duties: scouting, defense, assassination, and so on. And after much thought, I chose the Hound Knight order from my previous life. My current level was already that of an intermediate master. Although in these 7 years I had only gone from low level to intermediate level, compared with my previous life, this already surpassed the strength I had at 40 years old. The steward suddenly appeared, and happily told me that father wanted to see me about something. It seemed that my first mission at age 15 had probably been decided. Father, whom I had not seen for 7 years, was now sitting before me. I quickly noticed something unusual and asked what had happened to the scar on his face. Touching his face, he said meaningfully, "It was left by a female barbarian archer in the land of Hima, and I returned the favor in kind. But no matter what, I still have to congratulate you on graduating successfully and becoming a qualified hunting dog." But father's next sentence left my emotions unsettled for a long time. I had never expected that this time, the lower chamber father proposed would also be part of the elite class, and that he would even decide to let me go there and try. It seemed that father's personality in this life really had changed. He no longer valued bloodline but achievement. My current accomplishments had already surpassed those of an 18-year-old hunting dog, so father was granting me this kind of preferential treatment. But before I could take up this administrative post, I still needed to borrow a huge sum of money from father. Originally, I thought he would probably ponder it before deciding, but unexpectedly, he stamped his approval without any hesitation. That truly surprised me, and he even said he trusted that I would not do anything foolish. When I was about to leave, the steward decided to tell me some heartfelt words. Because of my extraordinary talent, the family had thought highly of me and treasured me very much, and he hoped that this time I would do my utmost to complete the mission. After all, the family head has never sent you to the battlefield. The fact that he is letting you begin with governance already shows how different you are from your other brothers, and you may even surpass some pure-blood children. My face instantly darkened after hearing this. Let's talk about that another time. At the moment, I'm still not sure whether I can handle this administrative position. Although this was definitely a good thing for me and I could use it to temper my skills, I had no interest in politics at all. I could never forget the feeling of losing my head in my previous life. Despicable Victor, just wait. I will definitely make you experience that feeling yourself. Because in areas where the wealth gap was too large, there were simply far too many poor people forced to violate the law. And after I arrived in the most corrupt city of Istaville, the people there had basically lost all hope in life, and even the governor had been replaced 70 or 80 times within a single month. But now that it was my turn to be the governor, this city would take on an entirely new appearance, and in one stroke become one of the top-tier cities of Istaville. The person standing beside me at this moment was my future assistant, Lich. In this city with a massive gap between rich and poor, he was the most vivid representative of the poor. Though he desperately wanted to change the current state of the city, he was constantly obstructed by the rich people hiding dirty dealings behind the scenes. As I looked through every clause in the law book, I found that almost every single one contained small loopholes. This had led to the emergence of numerous illegitimate businesses, and even the underground criminal organizations stood above the law. I told Lich that I would not change laws already in effect, but instead create a new one on top of them, and I promised that within 1 week, I would shut down every illegitimate business. But because I was rather young, probably only a few ordinary citizens would believe what I said offhand. So I had to stage a show that would make everyone living here obey me. The next day arrived, and I instructed Lich to issue a notice announcing the new law, gathering everyone in the city center. Looking at the new governor whose beard had not even grown in yet, the people below the platform all let out sounds of disdain. But I could not worry about that now. Today, the reason I had organized this emergency meeting was to persuade them. At this moment, I was explaining the law that had already gone into effect behind me, saying that from now on it would continue to be enforced, and even more strictly than before. Anyone who violated it would be pursued to the end without exception. The crowd below did not believe it at all. Past experience had taught them that every new official merely put on a show, and in the end they all gave up and slacked off. Lich immediately scolded the people who were making reckless comments, and after hearing him, the few of them shut up at once. Seeing this, I almost wanted to give the position to Lich. It seemed more useful than me standing here speaking under the blazing sun. Then I took out a wooden stick, and before the stunned eyes of the crowd, I thrust it hard into the ground. This was the prelude to the new law I was about to establish. Special Law, Article 1, whoever can pull this stick out will receive a reward of 10 billion gold coins under the law. At once, the entire plaza erupted in astonished cries. After all, 10 billion was 400 times the average monthly salary. They began to suspect that I was trying to catch greedy and corrupt people, and that it was impossible for me to really pay out that much money. Just then, a little girl raised her hand and told me she wanted to give it a try. The old man beside her urged her not to do something foolish. As the saying goes, fools have good fortune. Now her mother was gravely ill and urgently needed money, so she had to fight hard for this chance. Seeing the weapon hanging at my waist, the girl fell into deep thought. If, as others said, the money was fake and she would be executed, then who would take care of her mother? At that moment, I sternly told the little girl to stop dawdling. Since she had come onto the stage, she had to obey the law, or else she would face severe punishment. And she could no longer care about anything else. She squatted down and tightly gripped the stick with both hands. Who would have thought that with only a gentle pull, she would yank it right out? At that moment, not only was the little girl bewildered, but everyone below the stage was frozen in place as well. A murderous aura spread around me because I knew that when a person's expectation was at its highest and suddenly dropped to its lowest, the pain would be especially intense. So I pretended to draw the sword at my waist. When the people saw that, they all held their breath. At this point, there was no way they could save the little girl, and she too shut her eyes tightly in fear, quietly awaiting execution. Who knew that in the next second, I really did take out a bag of gold coins. But this was not the full amount. The rest would be delivered to her by guards before the end of the day. Then I patted the little girl on the head and told the crowd that this was the benefit one could enjoy by obeying the special law. In the days that followed, the number of people in the city violating the law dropped from 80% to 50%. However, this was not the result I wanted. What I wanted was 99%. Because this very method had actually been implemented by Bino in my previous life, but because her temperament after taking office had been rather irritable, even though she enacted this law, she never won the love of the people. Suddenly Lich covered his eyes and burst into tears. In fact, from the moment he first saw me, he had looked down on me. But now, on only my second day as governor, I had already achieved such excellent results. He truly admired me deeply, and even swore to heaven that from now on he would stick closely by my side. But I told Lich not to celebrate too early, because the real battle had only just begun. Then I drew dozens of crosses on the map, and those locations were exactly where the black forces were stationed. Looking at the map, Lich was astonished. He had already known about a few of those forces, but there were still so many others that even he had not expected. So he asked me how I had investigated things in such precise detail. I pointed at my nose and said, I didn't investigate at all. I smelled them out. A servant suddenly came to report, saying that the people from the regional association had invited me to attend an important meeting. However, since I had only just arrived to govern, I did not know that the regional association was an organization founded by 7 cunning local families. Although their sign proudly read self-governance, in truth it was a filthy entertainment club. Hearing this, the corner of my mouth curved upward slightly. Looks like these insects were already starting to stir. The people in the association were leisurely throwing a party, celebrating the arrival of the new governor. Whether it was the drinks or the women, they ordered as much as they possibly could. Although they were indeed wealthy young masters, in fact all of this had been prepared for me. As soon as I came here to accept the invitation, they would use the lives of hundreds or thousands of commoners to threaten me, forcing me to pay this enormous bill out of my own pocket. At this moment, the yellow-haired leader even mocked the Istaville family, saying they were just dogs who knew only how to raid homes and wave swords. Back then, he had gotten into conflict with a certain family, and Istaville had actually backed him up and taken things seriously, even personally wiping out every member of that other family. Just as they were discussing the background of the new governor, the red-haired one nearby noticed something strange, because a stranger had entered the room. Once the waiter learned that none of them recognized me, he grabbed my hair and tried to throw me out by force. With just a single glance from me, his arm was bent 90 degrees. Then I strode forward, told them all that I was the new governor, and demanded to know exactly why they had called me here. Not only did they ignore me, they even kept chatting among themselves in private. I slammed my hand down hard on the table, and immediately afterward released 40% of my magic power. In an instant, the hundreds of glasses of red wine, once infused with magic, could no longer withstand it and all exploded. After this show of force, they finally realized the seriousness of the situation. This time they had really provoked the wrong person. Although the new governor was indeed only 15 years old, based on the strength I had just shown, even if all of them, each at the level of an intermediate expert, attacked together, they still might not beat me. Afterward, I walked over to the red-haired man and asked whether he had intended to trick me into paying for today's expenses. According to the memories of my previous life, people like them loved bullying newly appointed governors in exactly this way. The red-haired man stammered and had no idea what to say. Seeing this, the yellow-haired one immediately answered my question, saying they absolutely would not dare do such a thing. The reason they invited me here was actually to test my integrity. After all, the city was currently quite corrupt. If the new governor were easy to bribe, then they would submit a complaint to the higher authorities and demand someone else be appointed instead. Clearly, I knew he was fabricating nonsense. Since that was the case, then I could only use force. So I punched the red-haired man violently in the abdomen, and kindly reminded him that not even the most loyal dog could completely obey its master. After stepping on the red-haired man beneath my foot, I asked the others why I had suddenly hit someone. If they did not know, they could expect the same outcome as him. And in order not to get beaten, of course they said they knew the reason clearly. What they did not know was that whether they answered yes or no, I was going to beat them senseless anyway. Because the reason I came here today was to eradicate this regional self-governing association. So they also stopped holding back, believing that together their numbers were enough to crush me. But they had still underestimated my strength. Today, I was going to teach this group of disobedient bastards a proper lesson. After beating them down, I had them all locked in cages. The yellow-haired one still had a trace of arrogance, shouting that if he ever got out, he would definitely take my head. I casually replied that I would just feed them directly to piranhas. That way, even if the King of Heaven came, no evidence would be found. At once, pleas for mercy filled the cage. Seeing this, Lich at my side also tried to persuade me not to go too far. But if he had lived through what I had lived through, he would never say such bullshit. However, the punishment was not over yet, because in a moment there would be something even more exciting waiting for these people. Smack! A bald man suddenly walked in. He was the prison's interrogator, and the various torture instruments he brought with him had been commissioned by me. He even said that in 30 years of working as an interrogator, he had never seen such cruel tools. The moment he saw them, nausea was the only thing that came over him, and what I was about to do now was use these tools to make those nobles still unwilling to confess their crimes experience a hellish pain like a living inferno. Soon afterward, this incident spread as a rumor. One group believed in my governance. After all, I could casually spend 10 billion gold coins without hesitation, and punishing a few people who broke the law was not illegal at all. Another group believed I was only staging a script. They thought that once the elders of the local families came forward, even the governor would have to release them. That group was indeed right, but only half right. Not only did those local families personally come to apologize, they even brought huge amounts of gold as hush money. With that, the men I had imprisoned were definitely bound to be released. But I had never guaranteed that the people who were released would still have intact bodies. From that incident onward, violations of the law among the poor had almost dropped to zero. What remained now were the nobles. So I reminded Lich that next he would participate in another plan, and that he needed to be 120% focused. We arrived at a place where monsters were bought and sold. Although the sign clearly advertised only monsters, some slaves and poor people were mixed in among them. And in order to overthrow the criminal organization operating from the shadows, my plan was for Lich to act as the seller, while I disguised myself as a slave to be sold. Because my hair color and eyes were rare commodities, I was quickly taken notice of by the auctioneer, and Lich held a specially made invitation. So not only would I be sold at a high price, but the buyers would all be top tycoons ranked among the 10 wealthiest. Soon, the slave auction officially began. The first item to appear was an A-rank demonic beast with 19 hearts, the Hell Rhinoceros. Its skin, bones, and horn were all top-grade materials. So the auctioneer set its starting price at 100 million. Seeing such a rare item, the nobles all raised their paddles and bid higher. In the end, the Hell Rhinoceros sold for 250 million. After several successful transactions in a row, the auctioneer decided to bring out a product that had been sitting in inventory for 2.5 years, a battle-type barbarian girl from the land of Hima. If she could be fully tamed, she would make an extremely reliable bodyguard, and her starting bid was set at 5 million. But even though she was dozens of times cheaper than the Hell Rhinoceros, none of the nobles present wanted to bid for the barbarian girl. After all, her wild nature would be hard to tame, and if things went wrong, it might even cost them their whole family's lives. Seeing this, the auctioneer had no choice but to serve up another round of emotional salesmanship and lower the starting bid to 1 million. Seeing that the nobles still paid no attention to him, he could only helplessly signal for the barbarian girl to be taken away for now. Suddenly, as if sensing that her chance to escape had just been erased, the barbarian girl became agitated and let out a chilling growl at the nobles on the stage. Seeing this, the muscular man punched her violently in the stomach, instantly knocking her unconscious. After dealing with this unsellable product, the auctioneer, in order to steady the noble's willingness to keep spending and to apologize, promised that what came next would be a rare item unseen all year. So he decisively sent me onto the stage. And attracted by my handsome appearance, as well as my rare eye and hair color, the nobles on stage immediately began to stir. Before the auctioneer had even finished introducing me, the bidding had already been raised to 600 million by a noblewoman. But compared to that, booth number 99 bid an astronomical 6 billion. When the auctioneer heard this, he figured that the final sale price was probably already set. No one else dared continue bidding, afraid that he was a plant hired by the organizers, and that if anyone dared bid higher, the bidding would immediately stop to squeeze out an even greater selling price. However, when they saw the true face of bidder number 99, they discovered that he was actually Baron Billy, the person in charge of the granary district. Rumor had it that he had recently acquired multiple underground operations and absorbed huge amounts of capital, and that his wealth had now entered the top 10 tycoon rankings. 60 billion was completely within reason for him. Judging from the rarity of this item, if he resold it later, he could definitely make more than double. At this moment, the assistant beside him urged him to be more cautious. If this turned out to be a bad investment, the losses would be enormous. After all, an auctioneer would never do a losing business. Seeing this, Baron Billy immediately scolded him, but not listening to his assistant would become a mistake he regretted for the rest of his life. After the hammer struck 3 times, I was finally sold to Baron Billy for the sky-high price of 60 billion. I didn't know whether his preferences were twisted, but just looking at me made him pant heavily and drool, while saying he had already thought of many ways to play with me. I ignored him completely and simply raised my hand. Baron Billy thought I wanted him to help remove my chains, but with one burst of strength, the chains shattered on the spot. Then I stomped hard on the floor, and magical power poured out as the seats exploded immediately. Baron Billy was blown backward by the impact. Looking at the blood-sucking fat man struggling on the ground, in order to stop him from continuing to harm the poor, I grabbed his back directly with one hand. And with the infusion of magic power, his blood vessels could no longer withstand the pressure and burst apart. After dealing with Baron Billy, I took off my wig and then said to the people below, "A circus really suits today's occasion. As for what comes next, not a single one of you here should think of leaving this place alive." At first, the auctioneer panicked when he saw that I was the new governor, but after I had ruined his business, even if it cost him his life, he had to drag me down with him today. But they still grossly underestimated my strength. This time, I could finally fully enjoy the pleasure that slaughter brought. At this very moment, absolutely no one could stop me. Even the strongest muscular man here was killed by me instantly. The auctioneer knew that if this continued, they had no chance of winning. So he remembered that Lich had brought me here, and immediately seized Lich to threaten me to stop at once, or else he would show no mercy. I remained unmoved. That kind of emotional blackmail could not threaten me at all. But what happened next made me burst into laughter. Lich actually wanted to use his own life to help me get out of here. It seemed his loyalty had truly reached 100%. Afterward, I told him there was no need to act so drastically. Before coming here, I had already taken a whistle from Father. I inhaled, then with all the strength I had, I blew into it hard. The deafening sound almost echoed across the entire continent. But after 1 minute had passed since the sound ended, aside from a brief stillness, nothing else happened. Yet just as the auctioneer thought I had been bluffing, in the next second, watermelon juice sprayed out of his neck. A mysterious figure wearing a hat had appeared there, and there was more than one. They all raised their weapons and waited for my order. The ones who had come were the Beagle Knight Order of the Istaville family. At my command, the Beagles began cleaning up the riffraff present. At this moment, one of them went behind Baron Billy's assistant, but just as he was about to deliver the killing blow, I immediately ran over and stopped him, saying this person did not need to be killed and could be kept alive. There would be many things in the future that would still require his assistance. Standing beside me now was my uncle, who was also the leader of the Beagle Knight Order. The reason he had come so promptly to help me this time actually had another motive, which was that once I was sent to the battlefield, he hoped I would join their Beagle Knight Order. But I had no interest in that, so I casually made up an excuse and left first. Then I went to the underground storeroom of the circus, preparing to harvest the treasury there. The sound of breathing nearby caught my attention. When I lifted the green cloth covering the cage, inside was actually the barbarian girl who had been brought up for auction before me. At this moment, her body was extremely weak. If she wasn't treated in time, she would soon kick the bucket. One could only say that she must have accumulated enough virtue in her previous life to meet me, because I happened to have a way to save her. Then I took a bottle of red potion from my waist. It was a high-grade recovery potion my instructor had rewarded me with because I had displayed exceptional performance during the graduation assessment. So I immediately poured it into the barbarian girl's mouth. Her body, which had been covered in injuries just moments ago, recovered instantly under the effect of the potion. Feeling her strength return, the barbarian girl also woke up at that very moment. But when she saw me, a human, she was still so frightened that she curled into the corner. It seemed that the abuse she had suffered here had truly been severe. But when she learned that I was the one who had saved her, the terror on her face turned into confusion. After all, humans and barbarians were naturally enemies, yet I, a human, had instead saved her. And using a few phrases of their language that I had learned from fighting barbarians in my previous life, I explained everything that had just happened here. I also hoped that after returning, she would let bygones be bygones, and that I could let her leave this place right now. Hearing this, the barbarian girl became extremely excited and rattled off several sentences in a dialect of the barbarian tongue. Although I indeed knew a little, this kind of listening test was still too much for me. Just as the girl was about to leave, she turned back and looked at me, as if she was a little reluctant to part with me. But even if she accepted me, her own tribe might still regard her as a traitor. In the end, she said thank you very much to me in the barbarian language, and then left. Now it was time for me to begin the true purpose of coming here. The moment I pulled away a piece of cloth, what appeared before my eyes was exactly the A-rank monster from the auction, the Hell Rhinoceros. In this city, there was murder, arson, looting, and robbery, yet somehow none of it was ever considered a crime, and the common people still seemed to live here in peace. What made things feel even more bizarre was that every day at exactly 2:30 in the morning, beneath the Statue of Liberty, there would be 7 wooden barrels placed there, each containing a head. So naturally, the next thing to do was have a proper feast. Time was of the essence. I had to finish devouring it and leave this troublesome place before the Beagle Night Order searched this area. And what had happened that night soon reached the ears of the common people. Anyone who had taken part in the slave trade had all 4 limbs chopped off, and many businesses had also been burned to ashes overnight. But the leaders of the 7 local families were dissatisfied with the punishment and each wrote 10,000-word protest letters. Because the 7 wooden barrels that appeared beneath the statue every day at 2:30 a.m. were in fact the only beloved sons of each of them. But I made it very clear in my warning to the 7 local families that what the royal family hated most was slave trading, and that their sons were likewise the chief perpetrators of it. Then anyone who violated this law had to accept the punishment without objection. As for all those protest letters, I tore them all up and threw them into the trash. In the days that followed, the 7 local families never protested again. Instead, every day they knelt at the gate begging for mercy, hoping I would give them 5 years so they could bear another son to continue the family line. But the law is a sacred contract, and I rejected them without hesitation. As for all the laws they had violated in the past, everything was also fully investigated over the next few days. Hearing this, the expressions of the 7 men gradually shifted to terror, because they had never expected that they would end up in such a state. In the end, I confiscated all of their current assets and sentenced 3 generations of their families for the crime of betraying the nation. From then on, a saying spread among the people: the new governor is both devil and angel. Devil referred to the extreme cruelty of my punishment toward those who broke the law. Angel referred to the fact that because of my appearance, the nobles no longer dared openly exploit the common people, and because the nobles' oppression was restrained, the people's quality of life improved one after another, and even the employment rate rose to match that of first-tier cities. Although this barely achieved my expected result, in truth, the city's prosperity on the surface was just an illusion. If no new laws were implemented, then the nobles I had stepped on would definitely try every possible way to rise again. So during the time that followed, I immersed myself every day in researching the law. And after seeing the new laws I wrote, Lich was deeply shocked. He had truly never expected that a child only 15 years old could come up with dozens of rigorous laws. As long as I remained governor here for even one day, the probability of lawbreaking really could drop to 99%. And this city, too, would become one of the most prosperous cities. I came to the underground prison where the criminals were held, and the person before my eyes at this moment was Andy, Baron Billy's assistant. He was extremely confused as to why, that night, everyone had been executed except him. I immediately explained, the reason is simple, because I want to get some clues out of your mouth. But Andy, having gone through strict training, would rather die than yield. He was no stranger to this kind of thing. So I proposed a condition: if he could answer my questions, then all of his crimes would be erased and he could leave here. But if he could not answer, then today would become a day he regretted for the rest of his life. Long before I captured Andy, I had already investigated his background. He had a business mind that ordinary people did not possess. If it were used in legal and proper trade, he would absolutely become an unmatched financial expert in the future, perhaps even influence the direction of the world economy in one stroke. I watched as Andy bit his lip and sank into thought. In a dilemma like this, no matter which side he chose, it seemed like death either way. But since either choice led to a dead end, this time he would rather believe in the governor's justice than continue touching acts that violated the law. My first question, then, was whether my coercive form of governance was correct. Andy denied it. A wicked smile appeared on my face, and I lifted his chin and said, "Then please explain your reason." He felt that although I had used the harshest methods to seize the largest criminals in order to establish authority, in the long run, I would only invite the hatred and anger of the common people. Once I amassed power in this district even greater than Istaville's, the common people would no longer welcome me as they did now. The final consequence would be that I would be hated by them, and even Istaville itself would regard me as a target of rebellion. I understood this scenario better than anyone, so I asked him what countermeasure he had, and what exactly I should do going forward. Andy said solemnly that I should give all the authority I currently possessed, as well as all the honor I had created here, selflessly to the head of the Istaville family. And in order not to attract the attention of the common people, I would also have to hide my identity and strength, and go to the Empire's Hordna Central Academy, because the people there were about my age, and in that place one's identity was easy to forget. After that, I would only need to wait until the time was ripe, and then the head of the Istaville family would become my scapegoat. The instant I heard this, my expression darkened, and I loudly berated him to shut up at once. But it was not because I hated his idea, it was because I completely agreed with it. It was exactly the same as my own plan. As a hunting dog destined to take revenge on the family, this would also be the only way to erase my hatred. I told Andy that I would remember him. Then I took out the key from my pocket, and I would keep my promise and release him without guilt. Andy looked utterly confused. He truly had not expected that I was not interrogating a criminal at all, but was actually seeking help. But just as Andy was about to leave, he kindly warned me not to regret letting him go today. His eyes were completely hollow. Then he clenched his fist tightly, because I told him the story of the local families. In truth, there should have been 8 of them. The 8th-ranked Rod family, and also the richest family of merchants. Before they were exterminated, at the youngest son's birthday banquet, he showed off a new sword technique he had learned only 2.5 days earlier. But when the elders saw it, they were all thrown into panic, because the sword technique was actually one of Istaville's. Soon, the matter leaked out and reached Victor's ears. Since his family's secret art had been exposed, he immediately released the hunting dogs to cleanse the matter. But no one knew that the ones who had framed the Rod family behind the scenes had stolen Istaville's sword manual and deliberately handed it to one of Rod's younger children. At this point, Andy forced himself through the grief and said that this had nothing to do with him. Then I could only tear away her mask, because she was the bloodline of the Rod family, secretly abducted by the descendants of those 7 families, and she had even suffered humiliation for a full 2.5 years. At this moment, Andy's anger surged. He did not want to remember the miserable period of his childhood and insisted on leaving this place of trouble right now. Seeing this, I asked him whether he knew the aftermath of that story. It was not that I had intentionally forced charges onto the 7 great families. The downfall of the Rod family was indeed connected to them. Those were crimes they themselves had confessed to. Before their deaths, those who wished to cling to life naturally revealed every unspeakable secret, including the crime of framing the Rod family. Andy suddenly turned around and shouted at me, "That's impossible. Although my family really was ranked at the bottom, it was always loved by the other families. If you dare deceive me, then even if I die, I will tear your corpse to pieces." So I lit a flare, and let him confirm everything with his own eyes. And in the very next second, Andy covered his mouth and burst into tears. He had endured hatred for 10 long years only to discover that the true mastermind behind the destruction of the Rod family had actually been the people closest to him. Then I comforted him and told him not to keep sinking in sorrow, because the dead would never come back. The only method left was to take revenge on Istaville. Victor slaughtered innocent people without properly investigating, so go ahead and pour all your resentment on Istaville. That is also the mission of your survival. But Andy looked puzzled. Why would I, someone who also belonged to Istaville, choose to help and spare him? Killing intent filled my eyes as I muttered, "I think you know better than I do that this is a very stupid question." After hearing that, Andy instantly understood my intention. He said he would absolutely repay today's favor, and also promised that as long as I was still alive, money would never become an obstacle for me. In the end, my goal was achieved, anti-Istaville members +1. When the next day arrived, Lich came to find me early in the morning. But the moment he opened the door, he was terrified out of his wits by what he saw. Inside my room was a complete blood-soaked mess, and there was even a soldier dismembered into 2 halves. After waking the groggy me from where I lay on the floor, he quickly asked what on earth had happened. I simply said there had been a lot of flies lately, and killing 1 or 2 was no big deal. As soon as I said that, 2 sharp swords thrust toward my chest, and Lich instantly understood the hidden meaning behind it. I told him that this was only the mildest form of assassination. I had been poisoned while drinking water, had concentrated acid thrown on me while bathing, and had even nearly been run over by carriages while walking. These accidents had happened more than 30 times. If I had not had the blessing of the divine river water, I would likely have died long ago. But in fact, what protected me was not only a steel body, but also the A-rank skill of the Hell Rhinoceros, tenacious life. A carriage bearing the flag of Istaville arrived here, and when Lich saw the person getting down from it, terror had already filled his face. The man was Yorkhan, the steward beside Victor, also the finest chief steward in Istaville, and one who had continuously served 4 generations. Moreover, he was extremely strict with his subordinates. Even if someone made the smallest mistake, that person's life was already over. Yet Yorkhan's sudden appearance still left me astonished, so I asked what his purpose here was. It turned out that because my recent performance had been extremely outstanding, Father had ordered him to bring me back for a reward. The moment I heard that, my brain completely jammed. According to reason, that should not have happened. My authority had increased, yet the old bastard not only did not target me, he was actually happy for me instead. When I arrived at Father's room, I saw a front-page newspaper in his hand, filled with all kinds of evaluations about me. And the reason he was happy for me was because throughout history, Istaville had always carried one label: brutes who could not use their brains and only knew how to swing swords and kill. Now that my governance was being praised in so many ways, that label would no longer apply to Istaville. To reward my excellent performance, Father placed me on this year's list for Kavos Academy. Within the Empire, it could be called the highest institution of learning, a place where all kinds of elites gathered. However, the academy had a strict rule. Once admitted, all students had to live in the dormitories there and could not leave easily. But that was exactly what I had been hoping for. If I could enter Kavos Academy smoothly, then I could get out of Father's sight and accelerate my path to becoming stronger. Then Father asked me which brothers and sisters I was closest with, because he had decided to choose a few to accompany me there. Without hesitation, I chose the 3 idiots with the cowlicks. Although I still deeply despised them in my heart, treating them as living punching bags for training was not a bad idea either. Then Father asked whether I still remembered the top-secret plan from when I was 8. Of course I remember. Lend part of the ruby-rich territory to the Rello family, then use them to eliminate the barbarian tribe and expand Istaville's lands. Father let out a sly laugh. It turned out that this plan had worked, and had worked very successfully. But the only difference was that Ikli, the head of the Rello family, had proposed a joint campaign. They were really too modest. So Father decided that before I entered Kavos Academy, I should go inspect the territory rented to the Rello family, and while I was at it, observe whether they supported or violated the newly established laws. I respectfully accepted this assignment. It looked like this time I would have no choice but to participate in the joint campaign. Afterward, I went to the city gate. After saying goodbye to Lich, I mounted my horse and set out for the leased territory. But I knew full well that after returning from this inspection, it would most likely be the day I parted ways with Lich. At that time, I would have to explain to him properly all matters concerning the governance of this city-state. My expression suddenly became grave. "You can come out now." In an instant, dozens of assassins in cloaks suddenly appeared. They were the Beagle Knight Order who had helped me clean up the slave auction. After confirming that everyone had assembled, the captain, Starly, began this escort mission. But what he said next left me speechless, because my uncle Andre still had not given up the idea of recruiting me into their night order. We safely arrived at the territory leased to the Rello family. At present, everything looked normal to me, and no violations of the law had appeared. Then I told Starly that in the eyes of the Rello family, the campaign against the barbarians was something they took very seriously, and that they too had dispatched considerable military strength for this action. However, this inspection was not our main objective. As for the true objective, it was to establish a joint campaign together with the Rello family. The city that appeared ahead of us at this moment was exactly where the Rello forces had gathered, and the many skeletons scattered around immediately brought Bino from my previous life to mind. The habit of their mages was always to kill off part of the enemy outside the city first, in order to give the opponent a severe warning. Suddenly, 3 figures appeared above our heads. Yet after we arrived, they spoke arrogantly, saying that without their permission, the city gates would never open. They were the 3 sisters of the Rello family. I immediately stated my identity on the spot, yet not only was I shown no respect, they even told me to wait outside for the time being. They would report my request to open the gates to their superiors, but could not guarantee how long it would take. Hearing this, my emotions gradually started to rise, and then I looked up angrily at the three of them. If you don't open the gate for me, then the lease will end early starting today. Cold sweat instantly broke out on all three of them, but they still gritted their teeth and endured it. Then one of them gathered magical power in her hand. Their fear was nowhere near as strong as their hatred for Istaville. Seeing that the other side truly intended to fight, I also stopped holding back. But just as Starly beside me was about to draw his sword and teach the three a lesson for me, I immediately stopped him. This matter had started because of me, so I would handle all three myself. Yet the instant I finished speaking, three voices suddenly shouted in unison from behind me. I turned around and looked carefully, and they were my human punching bags, the three Cowlick brothers. The eldest pointed at me and said, "This one is the strongest support among people our age. Taking you on is nothing to him, so let the three of us be your opponents instead." The three sisters' anger immediately surged on hearing this. This time, they were determined to properly teach these ignorant huskies a lesson. But what none of them knew was just how deeply embarrassed I was by their cringe-filled words. The reason the three of them had come to help was because I had recommended them to father, so they could also go study at Cavo's academy with me. Fortunately, none of them knew my true secret. According to the memories of my previous life, although the trident really wasn't too bright, once given an assignment, they would complete it at all costs. It seemed that in the future, if I wanted them to come be my punching bags, I could now do it openly and properly. The three sisters on the rooftop shouted in unison, "You three idiots, if you've got guts, stop putting on a tough act." But the three brothers showed no fear at all, and then gave them an unmistakably rude hand gesture. This really did enrage the three sisters completely. Instantly, magical power began gathering in their hands. Seeing them like this brought back memories of my previous life. The eldest braided sister used grass magic, the second used earth magic, and the youngest used water magic. Although within the Rello family these were not considered high-rank spells, as long as the three sisters coordinated, the power they could display would be greatly increased. And just as they began chanting their spells, a little sapling suddenly sprouted from the ground, and in less than 2.5 seconds, it grew into a towering man-eating tree. The eldest brother showed no fear at all. A murderous aura filled his gaze, and with one instantaneous slash, he easily cut through a massive vine root. His smooth, flowing technique even made Starly unable to resist praising him, while I, on the other hand, wore a grave expression because the sisters had not yet used their full strength. The eldest brother was successfully ambushed by a vine root from the side. Even though he reacted quickly and barely managed to block it, the force of the impact still made him withdraw and avoid the edge. The miserable state of the trident immediately made the three sisters mock them, calling them trash who only knew how to use swords. The three brothers were so angry they nearly exploded, because this was not just a humiliation to them, but something that concerned the honor of the entire Istaville family. So the three of them flashed into the air and split up to attack, while the three sisters were no ordinary opponents either. Faced with the fierce assault of the trident, they were able to answer every move in kind. Seeing that the two sets of triplets still could not determine a winner, continuing to wait would only waste my time. My affairs had already been quite busy lately, so I decided to personally teach these ignorant foreign tenants a lesson. A huge fireball suddenly appeared. After a thunderous explosion, excitement immediately spread across my face. With this move, those annoying people should all be burned into smoke and ash. But what I hadn't expected was that the trident had only gotten their hair singed and curled, suffering no real harm. They too were baffled as to how the three sisters had also mastered fire magic. However, once the smoke cleared, it became clear that the giant fireball had not been cast by them at all, but by the person standing on the rooftop. That person was none other than Bino, the future strongest combat force of the Rello family. She lightly said to the people below, "Anyone who dares cause trouble in the area under my jurisdiction, whether from the Rello family or outsiders, cannot be forgiven." With that, she leapt down from the rooftop. The three sisters originally wanted to explain that they had not intended to cause trouble, but they were silenced by Bino's glare. Then she pointed at the enemies suspended in midair by branches and shouted at them, "If you don't want to end up like that, then shut your mouths." But just after finishing that sentence, Bino noticed me. The fierce expression on her face instantly vanished, and she even greeted me. Just like in my previous life, the grown-up Bino was not only charming, but even her two breasts were astonishingly large. Back to the point, I then recounted everything that had just happened. Who knew that after hearing it, Bino would immediately roar at me, "After not seeing me for so long, those are the only things you want to say to me?" Starly instantly sensed trouble. It seemed that after the battle just now ended, it was now time for the geniuses of the two great families to clash. but even seeing Bino blazing with fury, I still did not understand what she meant. Left with no choice, she pointed at me and said, "I'm your future wife. How can you treat me like this?" Hearing that, both sets of triplets were instantly dumbfounded, and even I was rather speechless. So I had a fiancé? Ha! I had almost forgotten. After we entered the city, because many in the Beagle Night Order I brought with me were rather young subordinates, Bino seized the chance to tease me, saying I clearly did not understand the strength of the barbarians, yet still wanted to reinforce the front line with a mere handful of weaklings. Istavil had fought barbarians for years, and the powerful hunting dogs had long been assigned to the front and hidden in the shadows. It was just that father had entrusted me with another mission, which was to inspect whether the territory leased to the Rello family was lawfully following the newly established laws. To test whether I was all talk, Bino threw another question at me, namely which barbarian tribes were the most troublesome. I was utterly speechless, but I still answered her seriously. There were two troublesome tribes, Batar, famed for its warriors, and Lok, whose primary means of attack was sorcery. But among them, the real headache was Bastar's archers. Compared with those of the Empire, they were on an entirely different level, and no one knew what principle this was based on. Bino was very satisfied with my answer, so, judging by her own standards, she gave me a score of 8. I quickly stopped this sort of out-of-plan behavior, but Bino naturally refused, because she had to be a bit stricter with her future husband. Hearing that, I told her that the childhood engagement had just been a joke between me and Ikli back then, and there was no need to take it seriously. At the time, I had only wanted to test my strength. Using a broken sword to puncture the kettle above Ikli's head could only be regarded as luck, not a true victory. At that moment, Bino's anger immediately flared up, and she began muttering to herself. Although she resented her uncle for using such a low-level test to choose a husband for her, since he had already made the decision, she naturally still had to show tolerance and patience toward her future husband. But my next sentence sent Bino's anger straight to the maximum. Just treat the childhood engagement as a memory of childhood. Hearing that, she hurled a piece of clothing straight at my face and told me that the childhood engagement was the precondition for cooperation between the two great families. Since it had already been carried out, there was absolutely no turning back. She also said that she was a genius and would always remember anything important. Come to think of it, she had actually kept the clothes I had lent her to cover herself back then. It seemed there was no getting out of acknowledging this childhood engagement. Then Bino told me what had been happening recently. From time to time, the barbarians would invade the territory here, not only plundering crops but also seizing slaves. And the marks now visible on the city wall had been left by arrows during the barbarian invasions. Through long observation, the Rello family's scouts had discovered that the barbarians' arrows carried a mysterious aura, so the arrows they fired could easily pierce walls 2 to 3 meters thick. Back then, even the magic shield Ikli was so proud of had been broken, and together with the arrow wound on his body, the blow to his pride was so severe that he still had not escaped the shadow of it. That couldn't help but make me think of father's face. At that time, he had reminded me that the strength of the barbarians was now more than 10 times greater than before, and that many gifted descendants had even been born among them. A subordinate of the Rello family suddenly came to report. It turned out that 2.5 minutes earlier, the frontline scouting team had captured a man suspected of conducting reconnaissance. The moment I saw the other man's face, I immediately determined that he belonged to the Lok tribe. But they were cruel to the extreme. He had actually cast a curse on himself, making Rello's memory-reading magic ineffective. Then Bino shouted angrily, "You despicable lowlifes! In the village you successfully ambushed a few days ago, exactly how many civilians did you kidnap?" The reason Bino was so furious was simply because among the captured people was her dearest younger sister. But because everyone who understood the barbarian language had been taken away, Bino had no idea what the captive was saying. Seeing this, I told her that I had studied some basic barbarian language in childhood, so let me interrogate him instead. But when I conveyed Bino's question to the captive, the barbarian revealed a chilling smile, and kept repeating, "They were killed." Although the result was tragic, I still repeated his exact words to Bino, and the moment she heard the word dead, she could no longer suppress the fury in her heart. Golden light burst forth in an instant, and what greeted the barbarian next was a spike piercing his heart, followed by immediate execution in flames. A deathly aura filled her eyes. She swore she would not stop until the barbarian tribe had been exterminated. After doing all that, Bino turned around and walked outside. But when I followed behind her, I discovered that Bino had actually come outside to cry. She did not want the barbarians to see her in such a state. I quickly tried to comfort her and told her not to be too heartbroken, but Bino said, That the younger sister who had been killed had grown up playing with her since childhood. She had never even touched killing and should not have ended her life in such a cruel way. Then Bino suddenly asked me, because she had heard familiar barbarian words. I decided not to hide it any longer. What the barbarian had said earlier was not just about death. He had also deliberately said that all the people taken had been eaten. Hearing that, tears flowed from Bino again. This time, she cried without holding anything back, feeling that she was the most useless sister in the world. But with my comfort, Bino quickly adjusted her mindset again and swore that she would now make a plan to launch a proactive attack against the barbarians. But just then, a bell rang out loud enough to echo for miles. Bino's expression instantly turned grave, because she knew what that bell meant. The barbarians had appeared near the city. On another hillside, an archer was drawing his bow to full tension, aiming at the city wall more than a dozen kilometers away. And the instant he let loose, the arrow shot out like artillery fire, heading straight for the scouting soldiers on the wall. By the time they sensed danger, it was already too late. Not only did the arrow instantly kill 2 men, it even blasted the city wall into ruins with a single shot. Then the leading woman gave the order to invade, and her subordinates rode giant wolves, wantonly slaughtering innocent civilians. As for the women among them, they carried ropes and began abducting men they fancied, preparing to bring them back as breeding machines. The uproar was so great that I quickly arrived at the scene. 2 ropes filled with magical power suddenly shot toward me, and firmly looped around my neck. I looked up with emotion and saw that in front of me were 2 barbarian women. From their conversation, it sounded like they were carrying out the tribe's task of finding husbands, which seemed to suggest some other unknown scheme. But how could I possibly let the 2 of them succeed so easily? With a sudden movement, I grabbed the rope and flung both women into the air, then smashed them hard onto the ground. 2 barbarian men nearby were stunned by the sight, but they quickly regained themselves, took up battle stances, and fired arrows. I had no intention of killing them, so I merely swung my sword to block their attacks. Before coming here, Victor had specifically warned me that before Istaville's main forces arrived, I absolutely could not be the one to sound the horn of war. Yet while I was still thinking, a mass of blazing fire suddenly descended right in front of me, instantly burning the 2 barbarians to ashes. There was no need to guess who had arrived. Only, Bino was now consumed by extreme fury. When she saw that I did not want to strike deadly blows against the barbarians, she instantly went all out and unleashed forbidden magic. Even if this place were burned to ashes, she was determined to wipe out the entire barbarian tribe. Afterward, Bino mocked me, saying I did not deserve to be the strongest graduate of Istaville. But I explained to her that my commander had given me a direct order. Before the main forces arrived, I was absolutely forbidden to act on my own. My words hit Bino like a shot of adrenaline. At a time like this, you still want to obey the useless orders of Istaville? Then get the hell out of my way right now. I alone am enough to destroy the barbarian tribe. At this point, Bino's consciousness had already begun to blur from excessive rage. She launched attacks recklessly at the enemy, without considering the consequences at all. What astonished me, however, was that anger had actually increased the destructive power of Bino's attacks. Just when I thought this entire territory was about to be reduced to ashes, an enemy hidden in my blind spot suddenly launched a sneak attack, and a needle struck Bino squarely in the neck. Fortunately, it was not a poison needle, but one with a paralytic effect. I immediately prepared to save her, but another barbarian threw a lasso at me from behind. Luckily, I reacted in time and thwarted the enemy's trick. Afterward, I told Bino that maybe we should retreat after all. Bino couldn't stand hearing that and shouted back, "If we leave, then what about the farmland and the slaves here? Are we just going to hand them over like this? Do you really have to wait for Istaville's main army before you'll fight? No matter what, there is no way I am retreating today, because I absolutely have to avenge my sister." But just as I was about to forcibly take Bino away, a burst of killing intent suddenly came from behind my head. Fortunately, I reacted in time and bent low, narrowly dodging it. When I got a clear look at the attacker's face, I realized it was the barbarian genius girl Bino had mentioned earlier. A barbarian took advantage of my turning around and snatched Bino away. At that moment, I had no idea what to do. Everything just kept developing in the worst possible direction. Although this was also a fate Bino was destined to go through, she had likewise been abducted by the barbarians in my previous life and imprisoned in a cell. In truth, it wouldn't be long before she returned after wiping out the barbarian tribe in one fell swoop and truly transformed into the Empire's Queen of Magic. The barbarian genius girl leapt into the air and attacked from the side, but a move of this level could not injure me in the slightest. Still, being able to inflict such power while wielding only a bow made me tense up. And the other side gave me absolutely no time to recover, immediately throwing another punch toward me, but I dodged successfully once again. Yet it turned out that had only been a feint. The real attack was the punch aimed at my abdomen from below. The force of the impact drove me back 10 meters. It seemed I had run into a truly formidable opponent. Just as I was about to fight with my full strength, the barbarian genius girl did something that left me stunned for a full 2.5 years. She actually pointed to herself and then spoke human language. I knew it. We would definitely meet again. In an instant, a memory surfaced in my mind. Only then did I understand that Annie, the girl I had once saved from the slave auction, was actually the newly born genius girl of the barbarian tribe. I then sternly asked, "So this is how you repay your benefactor?" Annie believed the matter had nothing to do with me at all. It was the Rello family that had nearly turned her into a slave, and this time she had come with the determination to take revenge by wreaking havoc. With that, Annie leapt onto her white wolf mount, and told me that her mission of revenge had already been completed, but that the Rello tribeswoman who had been taken was not by her own will. If I wanted to save Bino, then I had to follow Annie and the others now. After receiving the news, Ikli also led his soldiers to the scene, but it was already too late. Bino had long been taken away by a male barbarian and fled toward the land of Hima. Seeing that the remaining barbarians were about to leave, Ikli directly began chanting forbidden magic. The moment it made contact with the ground, a powerful shockwave immediately blasted the earth to pieces. But even so, the barbarians still dodged with ease, effortlessly avoiding Ikli's assault, crossing over the collapsed city wall and escaping successfully. Following the direction of their retreat, the Rello soldiers reported to Ikli that the barbarians' route was actually leading into the surviving forbidden zone of the land of Hima. Hearing that, Ikli was thrown into uncertainty. That place was filled with all kinds of unknown dangers. If they rashly entered, even if they were not completely annihilated, casualties would still be severe. At the same time, he also began to doubt his own power. Was it really possible that when his beloved niece was captured, he, the dignified head of a great family, could do absolutely nothing? Seeing this, I explained that if we chased them now, there was still time, because the distance from here to the barbarians' main camp was at least 2.5 days. And I also told Ikli that I could guide the way, since I had often farmed monsters in the Forbidden Zone when I was little. Ikli urgently told me to move at once. At this moment, a soldier behind him again tried to persuade him. With our current troops, entering the Forbidden Zone is basically suicide. But before he could finish, Ikli stopped him and shouted, "Damn it, that's my most beloved niece. If anyone doesn't want to go, then don't. I won't blame anyone whether we succeed or fail. Right now I have no other choice but to place my last hope in Bino's fiancé." We reached the boundary of the Forbidden Zone in the land of Hima. Although this place was likewise within the territory of Istaville, once night fell, great numbers of bloodthirsty monsters would appear. At this moment, Ikli was deeply shocked. He finally understood why the gap between his family and Istaville was so vast. In terms of courage alone, they had already lost completely. Simply because all those accompanying him forward were people of Istaville. As for me, I served as the vanguard of the entire team. As long as any monster obstructed our advance, I would draw my sword and kill it instantly. Soon, 2.5 hours passed, and we finally caught up with the barbarians, even locating the temporary camp they had set up during a rest stop. Relying on the experience of my previous life, I reminded everyone that when barbarians camped to rest, they would always scatter a ring of dead leaves 8 meters around the outside of the camp to prevent enemy sneak attacks. So what we needed to do next was. But before I could finish, Ikli cast magic at my lower limbs. Though this was only low-level magic for him, used here it was perfectly suited, effectively removing the noise of movement, and he said that what happened next could be left to him, and I did not need to interfere. At the same time, in the camp ahead, Bino was furiously cursing the barbarians, warning them that they had better not let her break free, or she would absolutely burn the entire barbarian tribe to ashes. But no matter how much she shouted, the guards paid her no attention at all. The reason was simple: not everyone understood human speech the way Annie did. Seeing that her threats were useless, Bino also sank into despair. Now she could only pray that her uncle would come rescue her. The barbarian who had captured her earlier, Alan, appeared from the side. He began sizing up every part of Bino's body, preparing to use her as a breeding tool from now on, and he even knew that Bino's genes were very strong. Seeing this, Bino directly shouted at him not to get any ideas about her. But Alan naturally couldn't understand anything she said. The only thing he could tell was that her eyes were full of resistance. So Alan grabbed Bino's cheeks in one hand, then pulled out an arrow, preparing to leave his mark on his future slave. Just then Annie walked over and shouted, "Get the hell away from my slave!" Having the thing already in his hands snatched away naturally made Alan furious. "You may be the commander, but it's obvious I personally captured this Rello woman." Annie immediately shot back, "What do you mean, you captured her? Can't you see your own strength clearly? Without my tranquilizer needle, without me holding back that sword-wielding boy, do you really think you could have escaped so easily?" But Alan still did not want to give up the slave who was practically already his. Annie no longer bothered wasting words on him. Blue flames of aura began to spread from both her fists. "If you don't agree with what I said, then let's settle it in a duel. Whoever wins gets the slave." Faced with such power, Alan immediately broke out in cold sweat, and quickly waved his hands, saying he should not have talked back. He didn't want the slave anymore and would leave her entirely to the commander. Seeing that this confrontation seemed to have ended in Annie's victory, Bino was about to say something, when Annie suddenly kicked her hard in the chest. "I was the one your Rello family captured and turned into a slave. If I hadn't encountered a little kindness in the middle of sheer hopeless luck, I never would have escaped that fate. But you will never have that kind of luck. I will tame you personally, and licking toes will become one of your daily tasks." A violent explosion suddenly erupted behind Annie. By the time she reacted, her subordinates had already suffered heavy casualties. The one capable of instantly killing so many people in a single moment was none other than Ikli, the head of the Rello family. "You despicable barbarian scum, I'll give you 3 seconds to think. Release my niece immediately, or don't blame me for showing no mercy." Just now, Ikli had successfully ambushed the barbarian temporary camp and ordered his men to absolutely wipe them all out. When he saw 2 enemies mount giant wolves and try to flee, Ikli immediately shouted, "Today, absolutely not a single barbarian is allowed to escape from here." At the same time, I quietly snuck over to the tree to which Bino was tied, and then gestured to her to keep quiet. But the moment I cut through the rope binding Bino, she actually asked me excitedly whether I had come specifically to save her. My stealth operation was naturally exposed on the spot. However, Annie had already known I would come, so she expressed approval that even after traveling such a long way, my body remained steady, and that I would willingly risk danger to rescue the one I loved, and she even gave me a qualified rating. Hearing that, I wore a confused expression, having no idea at all what hidden meaning her words were supposed to carry. Bino, on the other hand, seemed to grasp her intention, and the eyes of the 2 girls instantly locked against each other. As for me, I was instead thinking about how to fight Annie while hiding my strength. Although she was very strong enough to even wound the heads of both great families, according to my memories of the previous life, I had never once seen someone like Annie appear among the barbarians. Yet the scar on Victor's nose could not be fake. Originally, I had guessed she might be Nighthawk, the genius archer I had met in my previous life, but Annie was still too young, and many of her techniques were not yet fully mature. Could she be a descendant of Nighthawk's bloodline? A magical tube hidden in a blind spot was pointed directly at Bino. Just as the poison needle was about to strike Bino, I reacted instantly and blocked the sneak attack with my hand. But in truth, I had already sensed the other side's position long ago. Seeing the situation spiraling further and further out of control, I told Bino that I would get her back to Ikli immediately, then turned around and swiftly retreated into the distance. Annie scratched her head, finding the whole thing quite troublesome. She had originally thought I would obediently go back with her. It seemed that if soft methods did not work, only hard methods remained. 2 barbarian archers blocking the way ahead launched attacks toward the 2 of us. But attacks of that level could not injure me in the slightest. I blocked their full force strike easily just by drawing my sword. Little did I know that at the moment I relaxed, Annie, who had been standing in place, had actually raised her bow. In order to take me back with her, she had to directly take Bino away within the short time remaining. In an instant, a terrifyingly powerful arrow shot out. By the time I sensed something was wrong, the arrow was already right in front of us. Fortunately, Ikli arrived in time and used a large-scale ice sealing spell, which allowed Bino to escape with her life. And when he learned that his niece had been poisoned, he immediately cast healing magic on Bino. But because it was an especially tricky paralytic poison, Ikli, who was not a priest, had no countermeasure, so he decided to take Bino at once to the Starlight family and seek treatment from Waku. But in the very next second, Bino directly pushed away the hand of her uncle who was treating her, then rushed over and hugged me tightly, thanking me for saving her life again. Ikli instantly stood there dumbstruck, tears in his eyes as he said that he, too, was actually very serious about Bino. Hearing this, Bino immediately shouted, "Uncle, how old are you already? How can you say something so cheesy? Once we get back, I'm definitely telling Mother. At that moment, a dog leash suddenly appeared and firmly locked around my neck. But what Annie said next left me completely baffled. She told me that there was not much time left, and that only by going with her now could I preserve my life. No sooner had she said that than a horrifying roar suddenly erupted. The gray sky was instantly dyed purple. Cold sweat poured down Annie's face. Although she had known there was not much time left, she had not expected it to come this quickly. The gluttony that parasitized my right hand started vibrating violently, constantly sending me warnings of danger. A giant spike shot up from the ground. The barbarians all began shouting that a monster had arrived. But just as Bino was wondering where it had come from, that single spike actually split apart into 8 and stabbed into the road surface. Ikli realized at once that the object's danger level was extremely high and immediately stepped forward to shield Bino. At the same time, I also prepared myself. I truly had not expected to encounter it here. If I remembered correctly, the monster attacking us was the S-rank boss, the soul-devouring poison spider Ikes. As the giant spider let out a chilling roar, Bino had just opened her mouth to scream, when I immediately covered it. Because the giant spider lived underground in places of extremely weak light, its eyesight had basically degenerated, replaced by hypersensitive hearing and touch. While we were still thinking about how to escape, the giant spider suddenly opened its bloody maw and spat out green venom. Sizzle, sizzle. As soon as the thick branches were touched, they were instantly corroded away. Its toxicity was obvious. Seeing this, I dodged with agile movement, while Ikli protected Bino with a magical barrier. But Alan froze for merely 2.5 seconds, and his long braid was splashed by the venom, instantly corroding away. At that moment, she gritted her teeth in fury and slammed her hand against the ground in rage. That kind of behavior immediately got her scolded by Annie. "You absolute idiot! You know the soul-devouring poison spider has sensitive hearing, and you still deliberately made such a huge noise." The spider's body immediately turned toward Annie's side, preparing to attack. So Annie instantly ordered her subordinates to mount their beasts and flee deeper into the forest. But because of this detail, the soul-devouring poison spider shifted its target to Ikli and the others. Their escape route had no trees for cover at all, it was completely open ground. Seeing there was no way to shake off the spider's pursuit, one of the Relo mages gathered fire magic in his hand. From years of hunting experience, he knew this was the weakness of insects. As his attack blasted forward, it struck the monster directly and caused a tremendous explosion. Seeing that, the mage and the others showed expressions of relief. That hit had been incredible. Yet they had completely ignored the gap in level. Even if fire was the giant spider's weakness, an attack of this level of destructive power was far from enough to inflict a fatal wound. In an instant, 2 men were skewered through by the spider's sharp limbs. Even if they left behind tears of unwillingness at the very end, they still could not escape their fate of dying. Ikli could only keep thinking of a way to stop the soul-devouring poison spider, but Bino's worsening condition made things difficult. Suddenly, an idea flashed through my mind, and I slammed on the brakes and turned around to stop. Seeing this, Starly immediately asked what I intended to do, and I responded seriously, "If we keep running like this, everyone will die here. One of us has to stay behind and limit the monster's pursuit." And in order to eliminate any thought of Starly fighting me for that role, I immediately asked, "Do you think you have the strength to face an S-rank monster? If you don't, then keep running. And the land ahead is Istaville territory. We absolutely cannot let it step there, not even half a step, or the consequences will be utterly disastrous. So the only one with even a chance of accomplishing this task is me, and it must be me." At the same time, I handed the choice to Ikli, whether to flee or stay and fight together. But because Bino's condition was worsening by the second, Ikli had to personally escort her for treatment. In the end, he also made up his mind that he absolutely must not waste the time I was creating for the team to escape. Seeing this, Bino cried so hard she was nearly tearing apart, shouting that I absolutely had to come back safely to see her. Hearing that, I felt rather speechless. Just by telling a lie, I had made everyone believe it. After all, even if I brought the monster to the territory ahead, gathering all of the current military strength of both Istaville and Relo still would not be enough to defeat it. But for me, this was undoubtedly the best opportunity to escape Victor's gaze. If I could fake my death in this operation, then I could buy myself enough time to study until I broke through to the 10th sword technique. Once I became skilled enough, I would no longer be manipulated by Victor, or I could perfect my skills even more in order to better hide my true strength. Then I would return to the Istaville family. At this moment, gluttony, parasitizing my right hand, was already starving with anticipation. the soul-devouring poison spider's figure also appeared directly above my head. At this moment, I would use every last bit of my power without reservation, including the steel body granted by the divine river water, the fifth sword technique of Istavil, and my strongest trump card, the Sword of Gluttony. Immediately after that, I turned into a series of afterimages and darted straight above the soul-devouring poison spider's head. Very soon, it also sensed a terrifying demonic power, but I would absolutely not give it any opening to exploit. My Sword of Gluttony burst forth with astonishing magical power, and in an instant I plunged it down viciously toward the top of the soul-devouring poison spider's head. In order to carry out my revenge plan from my previous life, I absolutely could not let this opportunity slip away. As the spider's claws began emitting the sound of cracking, I actually exceeded my own limit and broke through its ultimate defense. At this moment, endless blood gushed out from its giant mouth, and the crimson sword aura produced by my strike filled the entire forest. Witnessing this scene, Bino's mind went completely blank, and all of her suppressed pain turned into a desperate howl that burst from her throat. When I opened my eyes again, I was lying in an unfamiliar place. I had no idea how many days I had been unconscious. Could it be that I had survived that battle? Just then, I suddenly recalled the details of my fight with the soul-devouring poison spider. If in that 2.5-second span it had not been affected by the blinding light from the explosion, I really would have died because I could not defeat it. I had misjudged the monster's strength. For the current me, its offensive power was simply nightmare level. At this moment, every part of my body, muscles, bones, blood vessels, sent tearing pain through me without a single inch spared. But I still had no idea about the rope tied around my neck. Could it be that this rope had saved my life? If things continued developing this way, then I would be able to carry out my original plan of escaping Victor. Naturally, I would not need to worry about proof of my death, because Bino and the others would all become the most critical witnesses. But when I stepped out of the crude tent, I discovered that I had actually arrived at the encampment of the barbarian tribe. It seemed I had been picked up and captured by some enemy soldier. Behind me, a barbarian woman was actually leading 4 slaves over at a brisk pace, preparing for execution. I recognized the identities of those 4 slaves as third-rate noble clans of Istavil, but I still could not figure out why I was being treated differently. Suddenly someone called out to me from behind. The one who came was Alan, the same person who had attacked Bino earlier. After seeing that I was already awake, he asked, "How does it feel watching your own people walk toward death? I bet you feel utterly desperate and miserable, right? After all, with your crippled body, you're completely powerless to resist. Still, you should count yourself lucky your master saved you, or else you would have ended up just like those 4 slaves just now." But what he said next completely enraged me. "You pet dog of the commander." At that moment, the fate of being controlled by Victor in my previous life flashed through my mind again. No matter what price I have to pay in this life, I will never repeat that fate. The killing intent radiating from me after being provoked made Alan feel as if death itself had descended, but he quickly remembered that I was now a cripple. So he immediately swung his fist and smashed me hard across the face. Then he shouted at me to hurry up and follow the rope to find my master, because I had nowhere else to go. After saying that, Alan stormed off. A gentleman can wait 10 years to avenge your own. Once my body recovers, I will definitely repay that bastard many times over for the punch he just gave me. Listening to Alan's words, I followed the rope and eventually found its other end. To my surprise, my so-called master was actually the barbarian genius girl, Amy. Seeing that she was still bathing in the river, I honestly did not know what to say. Amy suddenly shouted for me to get down, then yanked the rope and forced me flat to the ground. What appeared next was an arrow, striking the tree trunk in front of me. As I listened to Amy scolding those barbarian children, I realized I had been turned into a live target by them. It seemed that staying here was going to be quite a miserable ordeal for a while. After finishing her scolding, Amy thanked me for saving her life earlier. She also said she had saved me twice, because among the barbarians there was a strict rule that kindness must be repaid double, but hatred must be repaid tenfold. Hearing that, I asked in confusion, "So this rope is the proof that you saved me, right? If it weren't for it, you would have been swallowed whole by the soul-devouring poison spider long ago." Then I asked again, "I'm an enemy of the barbarians, so why am I being treated differently instead of being executed?" Amy smiled and said, "Of course that's because your status in Istavil seems pretty high, so I wanted to see how much money I could exchange you for." That meant I was in real trouble. If the barbarians actually tried to negotiate a ransom with Istavil to buy me back, then my fake death and all my following plans would go completely down the drain. Just then, a wicked smile suddenly appeared on Amy's face. But unfortunately, I don't want money anymore. I only want you to be my slave. So now I'm going to teach you the first step of the slave training manual, which is that from now on, whenever you see me, you must call me master." With that, she cut the rope connecting us with her sword. But Amy believed that before she could properly tame me into a slave, she first had to bring me to meet someone. That person was the chieftain who ruled this place. On the way there, Amy also told me about their people. If you had no place to sleep here, you went to stay at a friend's place. If you had no food, you went to someone richer. Though these people were ruthless to outsiders, among themselves they were boundlessly generous. As we talked, we arrived at the central tent. But what I did not expect was that the moment Amy entered, the title she used for the chieftain in front of her was actually mother. Seeing that her daughter had brought back a slave and that it was a male, she teased, "Looks like you finally brought back that strong gene boy you've been dreaming about day and night." Hearing that, Amy immediately shouted in protest, "It's not like that at all, mother, stop joking around. I brought him to meet you because there's something else important." It seemed things were about to become much more interesting. Which also meant that the woman standing before me right now was exactly the Nighthawk I had known in my previous life. Comparing my current state with what I knew from my previous life, my odds in a direct confrontation were 0. My odds in a sneak attack from behind were also 0. If it came to escaping, the chance was around 20%, but that percentage was not a chance of victory, only a chance of survival if I tried to flee from under her eyes. At this moment, the barbarian chief carefully sized us up, seemingly quite unhappy about my arrival. She looked surprised and said, "I feel like I've seen your face somewhere before." But she said no more, because in her understanding, most imperial nobles all looked more or less like this. Once my identity had not been exposed, I was finally able to breathe a sigh of relief. For a moment, I had almost thought she might identify me as Victor's close blood relative purely by intuition. Then the barbarian chief voiced her doubts at all the bandages wrapped around my body. "My precious daughter, the slave you brought me doesn't seem all that different from the useless lumps in our tribe." Hearing this, Amy smiled and explained, "Mother, don't be fooled by how he looks right now. He's someone who can go 50-50 with the soul-devouring poison spider. It's just that right now he needs proper treatment, so from now on I want him to be my personal slave and follow me out hunting every day." Naturally, a mother understood her daughter's thoughts best. She then warned Amy that 1.5 times per night was enough, and that the most important thing was whether the slave's genes were strong, but she still had to be careful of his identity and background so that she herself would not be the one hurt in the end. After meeting the barbarian chief, Amy decided to take me to do something important. But halfway there, I still could not help asking her, "What exactly do you want me to stay here for?" Istaville's family rules are extremely strict. Even if you wanted to use me for ransom, they still wouldn't agree so easily. Amy's face flushed red at once, and she said she had only been joking at the time. What she actually wanted more was for me to remain by her side. As for what she meant by her side, she told me not to think as indecently as her mother did. That was the end of the topic. Then came the first task Amy assigned me as a slave: to build myself a tent to live in. From now on, that would be my dwelling place in the barbarian tribe. After saying that, Amy could not help but snicker. That was right, for someone as arrogant as me, and also a member of the human empire, building a house was surely an impossible task. Soon enough, I would definitely have to shamelessly beg her for pointers. She intended to use methods like this over and over to make me understand the difference between master and slave. But after only 2.5 minutes had passed, Amy, who had gone out and returned, wore a baffled expression. Because in that short period of time, I had actually already finished setting up a simple tent, and it even looked rather reliable. It seemed Amy's original plan had gone up in smoke. She had even worked hard to gather a whole pile of useful tools. Looking at the completed tent, I couldn't help but recall the days of my previous life spent fighting out in the field when it had been an age of ruin. At that moment, Amy seriously examined every aspect of my work. Whether it was the drainage ditch or the stability of the tent, everything was excellent. So she asked how I had done it. And because Amy had saved my life, I held nothing back and told her everything. First, what we needed to do was find lime soil and gravel to mix into bricks, then use animal fat to harden them in fire. At the same time, I also told her that while she was talking with the chief, I had noticed that all the barbarian dwellings carried hidden dangers. If a torrential downpour ever came, there would definitely be major problems. So after day and night of non-stop brickmaking, Amy and I decided to first use them to rebuild the barbarian chief's tent. And thanks to the bricklaying techniques I had practiced for 2.5 years, the tent's instability in harsh weather was finally solved. Seeing this, the barbarian chief looked utterly incredulous. It seemed that even the humans of the empire possessed things worthy of being learned from. Now, even in severe weather, the tribe would no longer need to worry about leaking roofs and collapsing homes.